You have a choice. If you take the blue pill, then you can live comfortably with the lie that everyone unabashedly loves the Matrix. But if you take the red pill, you'll get my honest opinion on the entire Matrix franchise. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Alright, so if you've taken the blue pill, feel free to click off our video and unsubscribe. But if you took the red pill, then welcome to Tuesday with Moire's Matrix Special, courtesy of my co-host Devin King. I'm your host
Yay!
Ian Taylor. Joining me tonight is two wonderful guests. One of them sadly cannot make it tonight, but we're very happy to have Stephen Beeson and animator Drew Adams along with us tonight. Why don't you two introduce yourselves, starting with the Muppet in the room?
Oh yeah, well, thanks for having me. I feel like I've introduced myself before, but if this is your first time listening,
Yeah.
I'm a independent, filmmaker and screenwriter here in Hot Springs, Arkansas. You can find my short film "Hopeless Romantic" on YouTube. Find me on Facebook, Stephen Beeson, Twitter at BMovieMagic. I'm around. I'm working on new exciting stuff, but I'm just an independent filmmaker guy. So thanks for
Woo!
having me. Definitely.
All right, Drew.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me back. I'm so excited for the first episode of the new year, eh?
Oh yes,
Hey, almost
definitely.
forgot. Thanks
Yay!
for reminding me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so if you've never heard of me before, my name's Drew Adams. I'm a visual effects animator from Canada. I have worked on a bunch of different television shows. My most recent higher profile show was I worked on the third season of the science fiction adventure show Final Space. And from one sci fi franchise to another, I am absolutely thrilled to be here tonight because I have so many fond memories of the Matrix. I actually, though I'm not on video, I've got my VHS tape of Matrix 1 sitting on my desk to inspire me.
Nice.
To keep you
Very
That's
nice.
motivated.
exactly how I first experienced that film when I was, what, 5 or 6 years old, which was absolutely mind-blowing when you barely have a concept of what the real world is. Suddenly, it throws everything into question. Like this film has subconsciously influenced me so much over the years, and it didn't really hit me um, how much it has kind of permeated into my subconscious when I finally got to see it on the big screen. I went to a screening double feature of the first two films at Highland in London some years ago. This is London, Ontario. Highland's an old school like cinema, and they do these retrospective screenings every month. And they had a double feature of the first two Matrix films on 35 millimeter, and that's where I saw it with Bernard, who couldn't make it tonight. But buddy, if you're listening, that was a fun time, and I know he grew up with this film. He was 10 years older than I am, so he was more aware of the real world than I was when he first experienced it. But yeah, it was really eye-opening just to kind of see it on the big screen and see it in that format.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd imagine
Well,
it would change your way of looking at it.
it's well, no, it's interesting because I actually for some reason I wound up missing out on these films. So I literally just watched like all four of these this week for the
Wow.
first time. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
this was quite an experience, and it's funny because we've talked about this, or I've certainly talked about this with films that like Casablanca or The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where it's like you feel. Oh, excuse me. You feel like you've seen them before. There's something about them that they are so absorbed into the zeitgeist that there's something
Definitely.
new and fresh about them, but there's also something somehow familiar about them. And I really, I mean, this was quite an experience for
Yeah.
for better or worse. Yeah.
If you haven't seen it before, you've still seen it just because it's been referenced in pulp culture. God
Well,
knows
I
how many
mean,
times. Like
yeah, and
Shrek,
it's
of all movies, referenced this. There's a lot of Simpsons references to the Matrix, and just
and it's
tons
also
of inspiration in pop culture.
sure, and it's also funny because I remember being a little kid and going to see Shrek in theaters. Like, so, I was.
That was your
It,
first
it is
experience to
weird.
the Matrix. There you go.
Yeah, right. And Shrek came out, God, 2001. So
2000.
like I would have been. Oh wow, yeah. I was born in '95. If that tells you guys anything, like, yeah. So it is. It's
Not
like
much younger.
these yeah, these movies have been around almost longer than the majority of us have been alive.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah, I remember when I was in public school and what was it, fifth grade, sixth grade, when Matrix Reloaded came out and people were watching the first Matrix again. Like every student was going nuts about the first Matrix. Like, wow, it's like the coolest movie ever made. Like, if you haven't seen it, you gotta watch this movie. And I asked my dad if I could watch the Matrix with him, and he's like, "Oh yeah," like he was really excited to show it to me. And at that point, he was like, "I don't mind you showing a bit of frisky stuff and a bit of violence and action." And I
Sure.
think the problem was like I don't have the nostalgia for it because like a lot of people appreciate this film for being like one of the first sci-fi films to like mix complicated themes with genre action and genre filmmaking, but I think Blade Runner already kind of popped that cherry for me. Like I watched that movie at a very young age when I was like 5 years old. I didn't get the plot at all, but like the setting and the world and the soundtrack was just so entrancing, and that was probably like my first gateway to complicated themes that by the time I got to the Matrix, even as a kid, I was kind of like, okay, that was cool. Moving on.
Oh, yeah. It was the opposite for me, where I saw The Matrix as a little kid, and that blew my mind. And then eventually later on, I
Mm,
discovered Blade Runner. Although actually, it was introduced to me once at a younger age, but I couldn't get into the pacing of it when I was like really, really young. But it was like many years later, I come across it again, like, man, I missed out on something here. This is special. And I think both these films are of that echelon, and for very different reasons.
mm,
Um,
Well,
but yeah,
yeah. See, God, and I grew up with like the prequels from Star Wars.
me too.
It's like,
oh,
yeah,
same here. Like
yeah. No, I honestly, like, one of my first theater experiences that I remember was Attack of the Clones. So I don't know. Somehow I missed the Matrix, but I don't know. I mean, talking about Blade Runner and these sort of ideas, um, I don't know. Blade Runner, like the first Blade Runner, I think is the better of the two,
Oh,
but
me
I
too.
really was, yeah, I didn't really connect with either of them that much. Like, I don't know,
Mm,
but this is kind of, this is something different, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But I think that,
mhm,
I think, like, when you talk about these massive, like, pop culture, sci-fi, tent poles, right? Um, Talking about something like Star Wars or something like Star Trek, like, if you told someone, you got to watch this new Star Trek or this new Star Wars, and they were like, "Nah, I don't think I'd be into that." Like, I could somehow better understand that, because okay, that's not your thing. But I think the first Matrix, at least, really transcends that, and
mm.
I'm sure we'll get into that. But I
Alrighty.
feel like this really hits that sweet spot where it is a genre action film, but it also has these deeper layers, and I think there's something really brilliant about that.
mhm.
All right. So
Well,
let's
I
introduce the
think what
first
we need to get
Matrix.
into,
Yeah.
I think I think we need to ask ourselves the age-old question: what is the Matrix? Which is the question that hammered so well into the marketing. The marketing of this film back in the day was so like top tier. I think that's where a lot of the interest came from, because the website was whatisthematrix.com. Um, and
Yeah.
if you looked at some of the early trailers, it's like it's a good way to get people excited without even knowing what it was at the time. And it's really hard to describe this film just because it is so like well ingrained in the cultural zeitgeist at this point. But basically, the Matrix is an artificial world created by machines after a human-machine war occurred, and all the humans have been essentially turned into batteries or into uh, pods to fuel the machines, while everyone is plugged into this artificial world that resembles our own. Um, and that concept, that idea, was so of its time, but also ahead of its time. Like this film was just, for the time that it came out, was just absolutely right on the money in terms of conceptualizing and giving us kind of a language to describe this stuff, and it has kind of influenced culture ever since it came out, and for better or for worse. And I think there's lots of interesting discussions to be had there. And I actually remember outlining this one time, this type of story that I've been wanting to like tell, but I think it is derived from this film, and it's what I call the Neo arc, and it's where a character lives their everyday life, and it's kind of drab, but then they notice some weird things happen, or there's something that's calling to them,
Yeah, call to
and
adventure.
then there's this call to adventure, but after they realize that there was something deeply wrong and flawed with the world that they exist in, which yeah, I think has influenced a lot of kind of cultural thinking these days,
It's
and
very hero's
certain
journey. Like, there's a lot about this movie that reminded me of, like, there's vibes of Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, but kind of taken to a new extreme. Like, it's very much, like, it's very prophetic in its presentation of, like, the hero's journey.
hmm
Yeah.
One of the things
Yeah.
I always found so darn charming about The Matrix, that I found beautiful when I first saw it and continue to find it adorable to this day. Sorry, not adorable, inspiring, I should say. Sorry, is that the movie is so very gleefully of its time. It clearly takes place in, oh, what, was it 1997 or 1999?
1999.
99.
And we need to
It's
talk
in,
about, sorry, real quick, Drew. We need to talk about the clever way the film kind of makes itself timeless. Because what you're
yes.
forgetting is it actually takes place in 2099, but the reality presented is 1999. So it's like, well, of course there's dated technology and people are using chunky phones and stuff, proper cell phones, because it takes the reality is in 1999. So of
Absolutely.
course it makes sense from any time period, but I'm sorry, go on.
No, but that's actually a brilliant segue, because what I was going to say is that this film so brilliantly bridges the gap between futuristic technology and contemporary technology. Why do the characters have payphones that they must go in and out of to enter and exit the Matrix?
Yeah.
Because that is the technology of the time. It's so
hmm
excellent and so grounded in reality that when it pulls the wool over from your eyes, you have such a wonderful intentional culture shock. I think that The Matrix, I'm very heavily biased when it comes to the first Matrix film. I adore this movie. Spoilers, audience. I have a good time with this one, and I can't wait to hear what your guys' thoughts are.
I
Yeah, I mean,
guess, yeah, go on.
I've revisited this movie over the years, and every time I do, I see something different in it, but I also feel reconnected to my first experience of it. It's one of those films that just works. There's a charm to it, and it just really connects on deeper levels. Like every time I engage with it, and I feel just as emotionally engaged in it now than I did when I first experienced it. And very few films have done that for me. And this is something that I remember when I was watching it in theaters with Bernard, who again could make it to this podcast. He noticed that there's quite an interesting aesthetic combination in like the set design and the things, because like the year is 1999, but they're wearing like these big like leather clothes, and they have these cars that look like they're from like the 1950s, and it's just this clash of different things,
Hmm.
and different like cultures as well. Like there's people of all different kind of colors in this, and backgrounds, but they all kind of live in this same world, and they all have this green filter on them, which is how they visually distinguish the Matrix world from the
Yeah.
real world. And that's all taken from the fact that, IBM computers were all just green text in Courier New on a black background.
Yeah.
And it's I think there was a there was a certain thing behind that. I forget the
Uh,
exact technology
hmm.
that made it that way, but it's all taken from that. I think the green is mostly added into like the shadows, and it's not like a full green cast on everything, but just that very simple color grade is such a brilliant but simple kind of way to distinguish the real world
Yeah.
from the
It also
artificial
makes
world.
any scene where they transition between the Matrix and Zion just very super smooth, because it's like anytime they cut back, it's like, okay, this is blue, this is the real world, and this is green, this is the Matrix. So they could just cut back and forth constantly, and you're never lost. Like, there's always a sense of visual clarity. So from that
Exactly.
perspective, the tint
And
works.
I absolutely love like the grime and texture on everything. Like you can
Hmm.
feel and breathe this film and all of its filth, which I like that it's not clean. Like this artificial reality actually isn't clean. It tries to convince you with like the textures and whatnot,
Yeah.
and it does an excellent job of that. And
Well, and it's also worth noting, like, as far as the film itself, like, how ahead of its time it was. Because if you look, in the years prior to The Matrix, there were films like The Net with Sandra Bullock, where it's like she orders a
Johnny
pizza on
Mnemonic.
the internet, And then there's movies like, Virtuosity with Russell Crowe and Denzel Washington. There was even another film that kind of tries to be The Matrix, also starring um, Keanu Reeves, called Johnny Mnemonic.
yes,
Oh my
And
goodness,
it's like,
we got to watch that one at some point. I
Oh
want to
man.
talk about the cyber dolphin, but that's a future conversation.
yeah, and there's also like
I forgot
even the
about that.
trailer is like he can carry 80 gigabytes in his head, and it's like
Wow.
you're thinking to yourself
So
like
much
he can't
memory.
even he can't even load Call of Duty in his brain. But it's
no,
like it's like so many people tried
Yeah,
to
in
capture this,
it's
and
because I think they date themselves that way when they list like specific gigabytes or specific technological things. Where I think this film does a clever job not mentioning any specs other
yeah,
than this is encrypted and like the render is so realistic it's indistinguishable from reality. So that already throws you right
yeah,
the
into
fact that they
this
don't
thing.
explain how it works, which is more of an issue with the sequels, but the first movie they do strike a good enough balance where I
Oh
think
yeah.
there is a lot of unneeded exposition in this movie, and we'll get to that, but somehow the exposition never delves into explaining too much about how the world works. I think that helps with the timeless
Mm.
nature of it as well.
There's another film that this shares similarities with, and that's Dark City.
I was gonna
In
say,
fact,
yeah.
the rooftop that Trinity is running across is borrowed set pieces from Dark City. Actually, they wanted to use the
Hmm.
real roof, but it was just better in that case that they filmed it on
Yeah,
a stage and
also a
they
lot
had
cheaper.
leftover
Yeah.
set pieces from Dark City. So there is a very literal connection between these two movies in that sense.
Yeah, apparently the
There is
well, and
movie.
I
Sorry, go on.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, apparently the
one.
movie had some budget issues as well. Like you were saying with the reused sets from Dark City, but the reasoning the costuming is the way it is because it was a lot cheaper. Like they basically
Hmm.
just bought stuff at a thrift store, and they were like, okay,
It
this
looks
looks.
expensive though.
Yeah,
Like they
it
they they
does.
got some great like the fact. Actually, I love this. I love the fact that they got it from thrift stores because I
Yeah,
love going
they
to thrift
had to
stores.
save money
I,
and
I
cut
love
costs. Yeah.
I love finding like expensive used things at thrift stores. Like
Hmm.
someone spent a pretty penny at a mall in the '60s on this back in the day,
And now
and
I'm buying it
it's
for
just
$10. Yeah.
I'm getting it for like $6 or something like
Yeah.
that.
I'm sorry, Drew and Steven, go on.
No, I was just gonna say, it's also worth noting that 1999, like I was talking about how in the years coming up to this, there had been films that had tried this kind of thing before. But 1999, not only was it the best like iteration of this idea, like 1999 was one of those touchstone years, as far as I'm concerned, where it's like almost everything that came out was just incredible. This is the same year that you have Being John Malkovich, you have The
Yep.
Green Mile, you have Magnolia, you have American Beauty, Bringing Out the Dead, and they're all films that are kind of dealing with existentialism and these kind of similar themes. But I saw Edward Norton interviewed one time, and I think also coming out around the same time in 1998 was American History X. And he was talking about that there was a period in the late 90s where it's like Hollywood didn't quite know where to go. And it was almost as if the studio executives were like, we're going to close our eyes. Here's the money and just try to get us out of this. Try to give us something new. You know, they're almost passing the torch because they don't know where to go. And I feel like there's something really beautiful about that. And I feel like we got some incredible films out of that
That's true,
particular
yeah.
moment.
I think at this point I'm gonna be the white rabbit in the room, and it just like how I'm the only person in my household that doesn't like the Matrix. I'm the only person here that doesn't like the Matrix, but I don't hate the movie. Like everybody
Oh.
thinks I hate the movie, but I don't hate it. Like there are things I appreciate about it. I'd like to go over those things real quick, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
For
I
starters,
want to hear this.
yeah, for starters, it looks beautiful. Like you said, Devin, like the color grading was really clever. And fun fact, the Blu-ray disc for I rented that Jumbo Video for this broke down. Like it was just total crap. They didn't fix it or anything, so I had to watch a 4K rental version of The Matrix just to watch the rest of the movie without getting jitters every 5 seconds. And they
Oh man.
toned down the color grading. They toned down the green, and it just takes away so much from the atmosphere. And some people complained about the color grading, but now that's gone, I kind of missed it. And yeah.
Is it that it was toned down, or does your TV not have HDR?
No, it toned it down because the Blu-ray I watched, like the first 10 or so minutes I was able to watch, the green was jacked up, like to what the original vision was. And they
that might
took
be a
it away.
color space thing, because I went back and forth. I've got the 4K version of it, and I was going back between that and like the digital copy you get with it. I didn't notice like major discrepancies with it, but I think HDR enabled is important in terms of getting that. There's a technical thing with like color spaces and whatnot, but
HDR
it
was
will look more
enabled, yeah.
saturated on like on the normal kind of color space.
I guess so, but yeah, on top of that, the soundtrack is great, and not the orchestral soundtrack, which I personally think is kind of forgettable. What carries the Matrix and makes the Matrix for me is the licensed music. Is so this mix of techno and heavy metal just gives the film so much atmosphere and personality, like Spy Break by Propellerheads, or the remix of Dragula by Rob Zombie, or Minefields, Rest in Peace Prodigy, just adds so much to the atmosphere. Like when I think of the Matrix, I don't think of the official main theme. I think of like Club to Death. Like that song is the Matrix to me. Every time I hear that song, it just breathes Matrix, and that's something the sequels
I
forgot
disagree.
later
The
on.
orchestral music is forgettable. I think it's very iconic in this case, but I also agree that the soundtrack absolutely slaps. This was one of the best soundtracks of the 90s, next to Space Jam.
Yeah, it was the second highest selling movie soundtrack. And if it weren't for Space Jam, it would be number one, ironically. And the action choreography is pretty great. Like, that's something the sequels kind of drowned down in quality in a fair bit, in my opinion. But, like, the lobby chase, like, the lobby show is the best scene in the movie. Like, it's just, despite the fact that nobody can aim worth shit, it's so much fun. And just knowing what went on behind the scenes is so great. But as soon as people go on,
I need to ask something directly about the lobby scene, though.
Yeah,
and
I'm
sorry if I'm gonna start a fight here, but I gotta start a fight.
Please do. Go
for
ahead.
a film that takes place all about a world of digital simulation, I adore that this movie has aged like fine wine for me because most of it's practical effects.
Yes, I know. That's not a fight. I 100% agree with that. And the CGI that's there is dated, but the fact that they emphasize on practical effects so much, and the set was styrofoam. Like all of that concrete was just styrofoam. They broke into little chunks, and every single time they cut, even if the broken concrete wasn't in the frame, they had the set rebuilt every single time they cut or transferred to a next scene. Every single time that set had to be rebuilt from scratch because they just had such an eye for detail. From a visual perspective, a filmmaking perspective, yeah, The Matrix is great. But as soon as people start talking, this is the issue I have every time I watch The Matrix. I see the opening chase scene with Trinity, and I think, wow, this is pretty cool. Why don't I like this movie? And then we get to Neo's drug addict friend, and he says the great line, "You're my savior, man. You're my personal Jesus Christ." And I'm like, oh, that's why I don't like this movie. And it just, I appreciate the themes it's going for. It's just, but we
Well, I
mentioned
mean,
this
you have
before,
to
Steven.
wait. You have to remember though that guy is like essentially he's an NPC.
Well,
He's
here's
just
my problem though. The dialogue doesn't get
He
any
is.
better once they leave the Matrix. In fact, I'd argue it gets worse in certain ways.
oh, I don't know. I mean, I think it's serviceable. I don't think it's.
I don't know,
I mean,
man.
I don't think it's
Anytime
bad.
Trinity like tried to confess it, give reasoning to why she loves Neo, it's just so embarrassing. That final monologue she gives at the end, where it's like blankly stares at the love of her life and says, "When the Oracle told me I'd fall in love with a dead man, I never thought it'd be you." It's just so poorly written, and I don't buy the
Well,
relationship at all.
is it that it's poorly written or overwritten? Because this has
It's a
been this
combination
is
of both.
the main criticism that I hear with the sequels, which we'll get into later, and I would mostly agree with that. But I still think it holds up and it's serviceable for the story, and it is of a certain. I mean, at least it's kind of unique. Like it's very recognizable, like this Matrix type of dialogue. It's hard to say that it's very hard for films to kind of develop their own unique voice and their own unique kind of language, and you can take it and leave it as it is. But so many films rely on other films' cliches and ideas, and this film arguably created a bunch of cliches,
I'd
which is
say
both
the
a good
film's
and
very
bad thing.
cliche as well too, though. Like we mentioned before, this movie is hero's journey to the bone. Like every step of the hero's journey, it doesn't really do anything interesting with that concept, in my opinion. Like
I
that's my
disagree, but
kind
all
of
right.
biggest
Oh,
issue is
I
that the
definitely
characters are essentially
disagree
just
with that.
steps in the hero's journey. Like all of their motivations are based around Neo, but because of that, it just felt like the characters fell flat in other segments. It's like if you didn't have
Okay,
Neo,
well,
you wouldn't be
Steven,
characters.
Steven,
you're
this is your
wrong.
first time seeing this, so I want to
No.
hear, as a total a new person just getting into the Matrix, what
Yeah.
was your initial take with this film?
Oh, I think it was brilliant. And I think that, I mean, there's something about it that, I mean, how do I even begin, right? I mean, it's one of those films. And I think that, I don't know, I've never heard someone, I don't mean this towards Ian, but it's like I've never heard someone who just flat out had these kind of problems because I think part of the beauty of the original Matrix is that you can look at it and you can be like, this is just a straight up action movie, and you
Excuse
can
me.
talk about the Hong Kong fighting and you can look at that from that angle. Or, I've seen people say that this is like a perfect live action adaptation of Catholic dogma. I mean, you go on YouTube and there are literal priests and like bishops within the Catholic Church who think that this is like a masterpiece for
That's
how
very
it
funny.
portrays their faith. There are
Yeah.
people who look at this and they're going through the same kind of gender discovery that the Wachowskis went through,
Mhm.
and they're like, no, this is a trans experience. And I think that in a way, every single one of those people are valid in a sense because the Matrix it's kind of what you make it. And I
Yeah.
feel like there is some brilliance to that. I have seen so many films come out lately where it's like the message or sort of the intent of the film is not nuanced and it's not
Okay, I gotta disagree with that. But go on.
hold on.
Go on.
It's not nuanced, it's not subtle, but this film, I think that if I watch it, I'm going to pull something out of it different than just about anyone else who watches it. And I think that there is absolutely brilliance in that. And you can talk about that. Maybe that's sort of the flaw with the sequels is that they kind of try
They just
to
ditched that entirely. Yeah.
Well, they
I
try to over-explain it and remove some of
well,
that
yeah.
interpretation. But I mean, I think as a standalone film, and even in the context of the sequels, and we'll get into that, but I think this is like a masterpiece. I mean, I really, truly do.
I think there's so few works of art that are so well constructed that people's views of it, criticisms tend to be more so a personal reflection than commenting about the film itself. Like you can nitpick all the technical details, but and this is what I find just so fascinating about film criticism and films like this is that it ends up being a reflection of the viewer almost. It's hard to create like an objective criticism of this thing without saying something about yourself and your own view. And that's why I say up front that this film was hugely influential to me. I saw it at a very young age, and it has subconsciously influenced so many things that I'm just like that. I discover more about myself every time I watch this movie, and that's something that I really appreciate about it. That
And it's
it
also, I mean, it's not just you. It's not just us as the audience. It's also, I mean, this influenced Hollywood action films for better or worse,
Oh
like
yeah.
ever since.
Mhm.
I mean, you look at something like Wanted, and it's like there's no Wanted without the
Yeah,
Matrix.
it
Now,
inspired a lot of video games too.
yeah, exactly. I mean, Max Payne,
Yeah,
Fear,
Devil May
and I mean,
Cry probably
some of
won't exist
those.
without it either. Yeah.
Well, some of those are better than others, yeah, sure. But it's still, I mean, I think we all, whether you're an audience or a filmmaker or whatever, you're just like a casual viewer, I think we all sort of owe a debt of gratitude to this film, whether we would admit it or not, or whether we
I
realize it
don't
or not.
know. I think.
It's crazy how much they like uh combine genres too, because this takes Hong Kong action. This takes notes of Western, sci-fi, obviously, and it blends them in such a way where it feels organic and natural. Not too many
Well, it
films were doing it
also,
at that time.
yeah, and it also does something that I think was kind of popular at the time, where it's taking influence from Japanese animation. And if
Oh,
you look
it's
at
very
something,
anime. Yeah.
yeah, if you look at something like Requiem for a Dream from 2000, there are sequences of that Darren Aronofsky pretty much lifted entirely from Perfect Blue.
Mm.
And then you look at something like Inception, which, yeah, it came much later, but it is kind of doing
Yeah, it has that vibe to
Paprika,
it.
Rest in
and
peace,
so
Satoshi Kon.
Yes, rest in peace.
it,
Yes.
You're an artist.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, See, I don't agree that this film is subtle. In fact, that's one of my biggest issues with it is that. uh, So originally,
Well,
the script didn't have so much exposition in it, but the script was just so convoluted that the producers basically insisted on adding in a bunch of exposition scenes to explain the plot, and I think it's just so obvious. Like, there's so many scenes where they just explain like the themes of the film directly down the audience's throat. Sometimes out of nowhere. Sometimes in a way that's not organic to the story. Like,
Well, I mean,
there's
what
this.
would be an example of
Well,
that for
a good
you?
example I'd like to use is I don't want to say Guy Pearce's friend Joe Pantoliano.
Uh,
Yeah, the
yeah.
scene with him where he's like, the steak. I know the taste of the steak isn't real. I know the Matrix is just telling me that it's juicy and delicious. Like that, but the thing that, yeah, it's kind of an interesting discussion, but it comes out of nowhere. Like the question that,
I don't agree
Well,
with
the
that.
question
I
I
that
don't
don't
agree
Agent
with
Smith
that
I
at all.
asked him
don't either.
before is, "Do we have a deal?" And that's his answer. I'm just expected to be like, "Okay, that's not really what I asked," but then he's like, "So we do have a deal." But what does that have to do with the question?
Well, it
Well,
has
it
to do
just
with
comes
the
out of
fact
nowhere
that
because
no,
the
no, no,
Wachowskis
no.
needed to sound
It
Yeah.
profound.
has to do with the fact that he's looking at this and he's saying, now, I can take the red pill and I can live, in this kind of
That wasn't
real
the question
world,
he
and I
asked,
can
though.
eat. Okay, but right, but he's saying I can eat slop, and be on a ship, on a cold, dark ship, and maybe if I'm lucky, I go back to this like nude rave, that like everybody's having on the, Hellcade.
Zion.
Yeah, Zion.
Can't,
And it's like I
let's
can do
save that for
that,
the next film discussion. Carry on.
or I can just sit here. I can eat a steak and be an actor and be a millionaire and have whatever I want. And so, yeah, I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that deal. I
I don't
think
know.
How many villains have like so he's a traitor to the crew, obviously, but
he's
his
like the
Very
Judas
motivation
obvious
makes
traitor,
Iscariot.
sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they
His
build up like
motivation makes
surprise.
sense. He's been dealing with this real world BS for 9 years, and he feels underappreciated, and I guess he's resentful that he's not the one or something. But it's very understandable that someone can lose their faith in the whole thing, and
Yeah,
he
I
just
agree with that.
accepts that this is our artificial world, but I can have anything I want here. I just want to stay plugged in, and it's great when you have a villain that has an understandable motive like that. And
I'd agree
I,
with
I
that.
think I think the sequels you can accuse of having a lack of subtlety. I think the first one just strikes that right balance,
I don't
and it's the
know.
reputation of the other two that I think is affecting your view of this, Ian.
I
I
think
think
the
if you watch the
sequels are
first one,
even less subtle than the first movie, but I don't think the first movie is particularly subtle either.
I think the first one strikes a perfect balance to bring these high concept ideas to a mainstream audience because they were pulling a lot from um, what's that philosopher's name? Jean Bulliard.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm butchering that, which they reference almost directly in that he has a book of simulacra and simulation, um, hollowed out in his apartment, Neo, when he's handing him the illegal disc program of something,
Yeah.
and he references some ideas of that philosopher, which are really fascinating. Although, uh, the guy who came up with those ideas initially distances himself from this movie because this is like a Hollywood popcorn version of his ideas. But
Mm.
Well, I
it is
think
Yeah, that
it
I
is cool
kind
to
of agree
have
with
that
that.
in a mainstream film still. Like
Yeah,
I do like that
I agree
they've.
with that, but I just wish it was more interwoven into like the visual storytelling and the world building. Like I kind of
Oh, I
want to
think
see
it's
what the
very well
original
interwoven
script.
into it.
D-
yeah, I do. I
I
mean,
just have to agree to disagree on that one.
All right. But
I mean, it's also
you mentioned they take a lot of influence from Japanimation, as they
Oh
called it
yeah,
back in the
for
day.
sure.
I
oh
wondered
yeah,
if Drew noticed any particular references or
Mm,
oh
ideas
yeah.
that.
yeah, please.
Oh my gosh. Well, one of the ones that I didn't realize until some number of years later after watching, though not Japanese, still very inspired by anime, was Peter Chung's Eon Flux. So late night MTV storytelling. Eon Flux is a personal favorite television show of mine, and I could blather on endlessly. But one of the references I didn't realize is that not only were the Wachowskis very much fans of this TV show, there's actually a very direct reference in The Matrix to Eon Flux. And so when Neo is being interrogated by Agent Smith, they put a bug in him to track him. They have this thing that crawls into his belly button, this horrifying scenario, and that's actually a direct that's an idea I'll say directly inspired by and not stolen from one of the episodes of Eon Flux, where they have an episode they question human morality and consciousness and conscience. And so they have in Eon Flux, the villain has mechanical entities, robotic skeletons, hosts, if you will, that will crawl inside of a person and
Mm,
manipulate their mind and physical actions. And so it's a commentary on, is it okay to, manipulate people if that is for some form of altruistic good, whatever that might manifest as. And Peter Chung was actually aware of this inspiration in The Matrix because later on, the Wachowskis actually reached out to him and said, "Hey, dude, we kind of lifted at least one or two of your ideas for our movie. Want to direct part of the Animatrix?" And they
oh,
hired him on to do Matriculated in Animatrix. That's not a part of tonight's discussion, but I will be referencing Animatrix a little bit
I feel like you
because
have to because the sequels pull characters from the Animatrix, don't they?
they do. One of the short films is actually directly canonical. I think it's called, what is it, Last Flight of the Osiris?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, that's the so they have a short film in Animatrix explaining essentially, in we'll get to this later, but
Yeah,
in
definitely.
a future movie they mentioned
For sure.
a ship has gone missing and possibly got destroyed to get them some vital information, and this is the short film Last Flight of the Osiris is the story of that ship prior to its tragic
Nice.
fate.
Would you guys agree, on a brighter note, in the original Matrix, would you guys agree that Hugo Weaving is the best actor in this movie?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough one, but
I think
I
he's neck and neck with Lawrence Fishburne. I think those two are so committed to this, and it's in their body language. I noticed this when I saw it on the big screen, just how precise their gestures are with their dialogue. And I don't know how much of that was storyboarded and directed to be
Oh,
exactly
probably
that way,
directed.
or how
Yeah.
much was like I can tell they took time to really rehearse and compose this. Just the way Morpheus and Hugo Weaving hold their hands and articulate certain dialogue while gesturing with their hands is so precise and thought out. It feels like a well-oiled, well-crafted machine. And just seeing the physicality of those two actors when they go head to head in a fight, uh, it's like seeing two titans kind of colliding.
Yeah.
Like it's more monumentous than Godzilla versus Kong.
well, I don't know that I would. I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know that I would agree that Hugo Weaving specifically. I mean, it's really tough to say. I mean, it's also worth noting. I mean, like it, this was at a time where, um, like Keanu Reeves specifically was going through a real rough patch. This was for him what Pulp Fiction was for John Travolta. Because if you look at, his sort of filmography up until this point, the last thing that he had really done of note was Speed. And that's the movie that's essentially Die Hard, but on a moving bus.
Yeah.
And
It was
Yeah.
also incredibly successful, though. Like,
yeah,
I'd
I
argue
mean,
that
it
movie
was
kind of
very
saved his career
no, it
first.
was very successful, and I mean, it's we've talked about the Die Hard ripoffs before. We've talked about like Die Hard in a school shooting, but you know, but yeah,
God.
like it was massively successful, and it was also funny because Keanu Reeves did that, and he swore he would never do another action movie. He didn't want to get, you know, like pigeonholed and typecast. Like from then on, I'm going to be the action
Whoops.
guy.
Yeah.
And he said basically, I'm going to walk away. I'm going to do independent little art house films. And it was stuff like A Walk in the Clouds.
Johnny Mnemonic.
Yeah, Johnny Mnemonic. Feeling Minnesota. And
I want room service. Sorry.
yeah, I mean, it's also funny because, like, what would happen was he would sign on to these films, like Johnny Mnemonic, and, he would sign on with the intent of, okay, this is going to be a little small, art house, independent. I mean, essentially what A24 is today. And then they would get Keanu Reeves attached, and it was like, oh shit, we've got the Speed guy. Let's turn this into an action movie. And so, I mean, he did the devil's advocate, but nothing was really quite sticking the way that I think he had hoped for, and the way that was resonating with audiences. And this was really what brought him into the forefront again. And so, I mean, I personally, I thought his, performance was great. And I thought Lawrence Fishburne was great. Carrie Ann Moss, I mean, I got to disagree with Ian here. I thought she did fantastic, and actually, Christopher Nolan tended to agree with me because she wound up getting the part in Memento
because of this. Yeah.
based on her performance here.
I'd imagine
Oh,
Joe
man.
Pantoliano was the same way, but I think they're
Yeah,
both
exactly.
much better in Memento than in this movie. But
Oh, I disagree. Well,
Well,
Memento's great. It's great
Who-
seeing
who
him
are
I'm
we-
in that
biased because
movie
it's
and
one of my
being-
favorites. I'll admit
who are
that.
we talking about?
For
Joe
sure.
Pantoliano?
Both. I'd say both. Joe
Well-
Pantoliano and Carrie Ann Moss.
I just love that line where he's like, Lenny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Ah.
my
Which
mom hates
time?
yeah. Well, anytime he says it, it's just entertaining. It's like my mom hates calling. It's like my mom used to call me that. I hate that name. Did I tell you that? Only every time I see you. Sorry, I'm biased. Memento is like one of the best
No,
movies
Memento
ever,
is
but
is a masterpiece. I mean, I agree with you, but I also think that this is incredible. And
that's.
I mean,
I'm glad you enjoy it.
Yes. Well, um, but
I-
no, I mean, I don't know, and I think that a lot of what this film touches upon, and I think it resonates with pretty much every audience member that I've heard of, people that have discussed this film, is that I feel like there's a sense of community um, that comes with uh, that sort of idea of like the red pill. And I think that now more than ever, we're kind of entering this world where there are these divisions, and it's like you're woke, you're based in red pill, and it means
Welcome,
different things.
Literally woke.
Yeah,
welcome
no,
to the club.
yeah, no, and it means different things to different people, and I think that if you are someone who, I don't know, unironically believes that everyone in Hollywood and in politics is a lizard person, it's like, as crazy as that may be, I'm not saying that I subscribe to that, but I'm saying that if you did, and
This is the
you
movie
were
for
the
you.
only, yeah, if you were the only person that was supposedly woke to know this, to know that there was some giant conspiracy out there, then you would have to find this community of people, and I that also believed in what you're saying. And I think that the film illustrates that in, like, well, there's Neo, and he finds Morpheus, and he finds Trinity. And I think that people really resonate with that. And I think that it's, like I was talking about
Yeah,
earlier,
because
it's like
Trinity is
this
hot and Morpheus is cool.
well, I think
That's
it's
all those
like,
characters have to offer for me, man. Like,
no, no,
sorry.
I think that it's fascinating, and I'm struggling to understand where you're coming from with the lack of
No,
subtlety, because I've
that's
just
fine
mentioned
because I feel
no, no,
like
I've
I
just
go on.
mentioned like 15 different groups, from Catholic groups,
I
from LGBT, from conspiracy
I
theorists,
don't
who
want to
all
sound
pull from this film,
pretentious.
for better or worse,
I
that they're a part of something.
I don't.
And so I don't know
Ian,
how you
Ian,
can
Oh,
I'm
take
gonna allow
something
you.
that
I'm
has
gonna allow
touched
you to
this
say
many
pretentious
people.
once more in this podcast, but that's it. That's
hey, come on. Our
you,
No,
you,
subtitle
I'm
is
no, no.
trying.
pretentious.
We have to have a counter anytime that word comes up because it just becomes shallow criticism. So I will allow you to say pretentious once more in
No,
this
no,
podcast,
I'm
and that is it.
criticizing myself for sounding pretentious, though. That's
Oh,
what I was
well,
getting
we're
at.
gonna get into self-criticism soon. Don't
But
worry.
no,
Yeah.
no. This is a serious question, though, Ian. Like, how can, after all I've said, like all the different people that this
Well,
film has affected, how can you say that it's not subtle?
here's the thing. Art is open to interpretation. Like,
Yes.
one man's trash is another man's treasure.
Are you
Somebody
are
could
you
look at
really calling this film trash?
it's not trash. It's just I don't enjoy this on a story level compared to other
Okay,
people.
well, you're wrong. But go ahead.
And I'm not saying they're projecting on things that aren't there in the Matrix. It's just, for me personally, it's not so much that I don't see them as that I don't resonate with them. I don't like the way it's delivered and conveyed. Let's just put it in
That's
that
fair.
regard. It's
That's
I
fair.
don't
I mean, I
like the
guess.
presentation of the story through like the
Well, and
acting and
there's
writing.
If I'll say something, though, it's that I think this is a real testament to the quality of this film because it can inspire and criticize and confuse and entertain so much.
Yeah,
And
that's one thing I
I
like
think
about it.
Yes.
even regarding the future entries in the franchise, which I don't know if anyone holds them as high as the original, I think that Matrix 1 will stand as, justifiably so, an absolute pillar of pop culture, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse. And
Exactly. Yeah.
something
I'd
that I
agree with that.
ruminate on every now and again, very similar to poor Orson Welles, is that this was, if I'm not mistaken, one of the Wachowskis' first films, and they not only made a icon of science fiction cinema, but they even invented more than one cinematic technique. For God's sake, they invented the bullet time shot, and I don't envy the legacy of having to follow up with that.
Well, it's slow motion in
Well, I
action
mean,
movies was famed for a long period of time, but I guess that particular effect
they
was
had
different.
to
Yeah.
invent the cameras to
Yeah.
capture, Trinity, like mid-air.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a whole array of like SLR cameras that are perfectly positioned and mathematically like timed to go off at certain times so that the whole process of capturing someone in motion like that is what's is what's revolutionary. It's not the slow motion element that has been around ever since cameras could record more than 24 frames.
It's the way it's
I
shot.
I'm just reminding myself. I wanted to mention there's a film by a man named Zita Vertov in Russia called Man with a Movie Camera, and he experimented with camera techniques way early on, slow motion, fast motion, and split
Time
frames,
lapse.
and all these techniques that we take for granted or even seen as gimmicky today. He kind of it's fucked around with and it's pioneered way back in the day. So a lot of credit goes to him, I'd say. People always say that's a very scholarly reference when I bring it up, but fuck it, it's true. Um,
Okay,
but
boomer.
no, like the Matrix blended this like technology with modern CGI, basically just using like frame blending to make it all look like one smooth motion. But it's just a combination of things that was innovative and that was worth of note. And I wanted to
Yeah,
try to find the VFX art, the actual VFX person who was behind it, but a lot of credit should go to him.
well, and I mean, I think, talking about the kind of technical aspects, I mean, this isn't the first film to do slow motion in a fight scene. I mean, John Woo, obviously. There was Sam
Last of the
Peckinpah.
Mohicans.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, Peckinpah with Straw Dogs and The Wild Bunch. I mean, this was something that was going on for a while, and I think that, if you're talking about a gunfight, something that we kind of take for granted, especially nowadays, is that normally gunfights don't take as long as they do in movies. It's more akin to, if you guys have ever seen the Wind River, the end, where it's just like bang bang, everyone's dead.
Yeah, or Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he just shoots
Exactly.
the guy. Like that's what a real gunfight takes place. That's how a real gunfight
quick,
takes place.
and it's fast and it's brutal, and you don't know how to react. And because of that, I mean, depending on the kind of film that you're making, there's not a lot of opportunity there to draw out suspense and to draw out tension. And so I think what the Wachowskis did here, by just completely slowing things down to such a pace, and to make it make sense in the narrative, because in other films it was a stylistic decision and it was kind of cool, but this also kind of has a narrative weight to it.
Yeah.
And I think that there is some genius in that.
That's true.
But yeah, I mean, another thing that I think is really brilliant about the first Matrix, that scene where Neo wakes up, that is, to me, one of the most brilliant examples of existential, like, cosmic horror.
Yes.
When he's
really.
in that pod of goo, and you find out that all of this liquid is being heated and cooled to simulate the weather, and he's got little like probes on him to simulate taste and touch, and he's got this tube down his throat. And I mean, there's so much, like, when this was circulating around Hollywood, this was called the script that no one understood. It was like
exactly.
people couldn't. This was so far ahead of its time that people couldn't even wrap their heads around it. Like, there's a great story of like the Wachowskis going to Will Smith and trying to explain it to him, and he's like, I don't understand any of this,
But I like
it. The whole reason he turned down the role, and they were going to have Kiefer Sutherland in the place of Morpheus, and how weird and different of a movie would that have been?
So yeah, they were going to have Will Smith as Neo. They were going to have Val Kilmer as Morpheus.
What?
Oh, Val Kilmer. I thought it was Kiefer Sutherland.
Okay,
no, it was Val Kilmer.
I don't like the acting in this movie, but that would not work.
They also were going to put Janet Jackson as Trinity.
Wow.
So this could have been a very different movie. And I mean, we've kind of talked, before in something like...
like Lord of the Rings. Like, it was originally going to be Sean Connery as Gandalf and a whole bunch of different
I'm almost
actors.
disappointed we didn't get that. But
it would have been interesting. But,
I imagine there's an alternate timeline where that happened, and I'm curious.
Yeah.
There's an alternate timeline with Will Smith as Neo.
Well, just as an aside, I mean, they wanted O.J. Simpson to play the Terminator.
Oh, yeah.
it was funny because James Cameron made the statement that no one would ever believe that O.J. Simpson could be a killer. And
Oh,
the
God.
Terminator.
They're right.
Oh no!
Unless you're Norm Macdonald.
I forgot
Yeah,
about that.
right. Well, murder
Oh no!
is legal in the state of California.
All right.
Um,
Jeez.
no, but I
Uh.
mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to just go on and on, but I really, I mean, I think this is really transcends a lot of things that are in this genre and the films that tried to capture this after the fact.
Fair enough.
Well, I'm really happy that you enjoyed it, Steven, because
Yeah, me
I
too.
wouldn't know how to. Well, I could argue for it all day, but
Yeah,
I,
well,
I, I, I can't describe to you when I saw that scene of him waking up, and I was like maybe 6 years old. It reminded me of being born, and just like it just has such a visceral impact, like when you see it at a
Yeah,
young
the
age. But
imagery of him like taking the cord out of his mouth, like that was gross.
oh
oh
yeah,
God, it's so visceral, but it's
Mhm.
it's so effective. And then I also like the scene where like he's seeing lights for the first time, and he doesn't realize that that's because he never used his eyes before, and he has all those acupuncture needles on him. I mean, there's so many scenes that you just feel when you watch it, and
Yeah.
so few films can really capture that.
Yeah.
Oh, I found that person's name, John Gata. He's the person that
Hey.
uh, helped develop the whole bullet time sequence, which really is just an evolution of the first motion picture thing they ever did, way back then, when they were trying to capture a horse running, because someone was trying to bet do all four hooves lift off the air at some point, and they had an array of cameras just taking still pictures, and that was technically like the first motion film. So really, it's just an evolution of that very first initial idea.
Nice. Well,
But
yeah.
the
it's
way they
alright.
use it is what's revolutionary.
It's alright.
Anyway,
It looks cool. I also like the Smith chase at at the end of the movie. That kind of reminded me of Seven.
yes.
Like it reminded me a lot of the chase scene in Seven, like the way he's barreling for different apartments, the way it's shot. Even the music sounds very familiar to Howard Shore's score for that scene. But can you guys at least admit that kissing a dead guy was kind of weird? Like she kisses Keanu Reeves when he's
Wh-
dead. Like he's
What are you
technically dead
talking
in
about?
that scene.
Wait,
What's
which
weird
one?
about that?
When
Wait,
Carrie Ann Moss kisses Keanu Reeves at the end of the movie, and I'm pretty sure Keanu Reeves is dead at that point, or at least he's close to dead, or she thinks he's dead. So she straight up
No, she
just
says
commits.
she says you can't be dead. You missed the whole point of that
Well,
scene.
she
I
said
think,
you
yeah,
can't be
it's.
dead. I
I
thought that was
think it's
denial.
more-
Like, wasn't that just denial? Like she
no,
was like,
no.
no,
I
no,
think
you
it's
can't.
It was
supposed to be.
conviction.
Well, I think it's supposed to be kind of like Snow White in a sense, like her love is
Yeah.
bringing
Okay.
him back,
Oh,
which I mean is kind of hokey in itself.
it's so.
But the
It
film
works.
it
No, it
kind of
doesn't.
works, but the film also
Okay.
makes a point, and I mean it's funny to talk about this now, knowing the context that we do about the creators of the film. But there's several moments throughout the film that someone will refer to Keanu Reeves' character as like Dorothy or Alice in Wonderland.
Oh,
And,
they referenced
you know,
Alice in Wonderland 3 times
yeah,
because
well,
once wasn't
it's
enough.
yeah, but the Snow White thing. I mean, it's kind of
Yeah,
maybe there's something there.
I
Anyway,
just thought that was really
it's
dumb. I'm
we
sorry.
we are an hour into this, and we've only talked about the first film. We have 3 more films to go,
Yeah,
gentlemen.
what would you
So
guys rate The Matrix?
10. I'd give it
Ooh.
11 if I could.
What about you,
If
Steven?
it
10.
5
I
out of...
will
Yeah, go on,
based
Drew.
red pilled, you're
I
will
you're
actually
officially
give
woke.
this like when I think about what this movie has done for me and given me and entertained for me, I actually give this movie a 9. I sincerely do. I adored this movie and I'll gladly watch it again.
All right,
Hell yeah.
like I'm really glad you guys enjoy it and people can resonate with me. This is like my 7th time trying with this movie, but I can't get behind on the hype. Like as soon as they just start talking and the way the story is explored, and I like the ideas, I just don't like the way they're presented. We'll just leave it at that. It's a lot about the filmmaking and the action scenes I appreciate, but I can't give it any higher than a 5 out of 10. I'm sorry.
Wow.
I just can't
God.
connect with this one.
Not even a 6.9. Jesus Christ.
No, I'm
It's
sorry.
all downhill from here.
I didn't
Wow.
have that much fun with it. I'm sorry, but
Mm.
I appreciate it.
You're gonna hate me next week, Ian.
Oh, I'm sure.
Oh boy.
You're just
Uh,
gonna shit on The Godfather on purpose.
What?
Yeah, you're not even
It-
gonna
it-
genuinely
it-
hate it. You're just gonna shit on purpose just
it
to get revenge
No,
for The
no,
Matrix.
I'm not saying that. It's the fact that I made you announce it next week is just by mentioning it.
Oh, yeah, recommend whatever you want, man. It's all good.
I did not care for The Godfather.
I did-
It insists upon
And
itself.
insists
Well,
upon itself, Lois. Insists upon itself. Robert Duvall! Yeah,
yeah, no.
that's a very good scene.
Well, I
Steven,
suppose
It-
I suppose I will introduce.
your waifu awaits.
Okay. The Matrix Reloaded is a 2003 American science fiction action thriller film.
You don't say.
It is
It
written
is certainly
and
a film.
directed.
Tell me
written-
more.
It is written and directed by the Wachowskis. It is the
Didn't they direct the last movie we just covered?
yes,
Yeah, I
they
heard
did,
about
yeah.
those two.
This
Oh,
is
I wonder if it's related. Sorry,
Yeah.
go
This
on.
is the direct sequel to 1999's The Matrix. It is the second installment. The film stars Keanu Reeves, Lawrence Fishburne, Carrie-Anne Moss, Hugo Weaving, all returning from the first film, as well as series newcomers Jada Pinkett Smith, Gloria Foster, and Monica Bellucci as Persephone. So this is
Persephone.
this is the sequel. Premiered in May of 2003. It is a continuation of the original story, where we get to see Zion. We get to see all of the world, and yeah, I'm gonna be honest here. I really liked this film. It's set
Hey.
6 months after the events of the original Matrix, where Neo and Trinity are romantically involved, and the first act of the film, I think, is more about sort of the politics and sort of the world building, and it's a little slow to get going, but I still had fun with it, and I think this might be the best of the sequels. I really like
I'd
it.
agree with
There's
that.
I agree with that.
yeah. So what did you guys think about it?
I think it's the sequels in general I think are overhated. I really like this
Oh,
movie. Like
I agree.
when it came out, I didn't watch it as much as the first, but the action set pieces in this mostly kept the same momentum. It was really cool seeing Zion for the first time. And something I was going to quote in the first film, and Ian, I can already hear you just trying to just trying to sneak your way in here just
You don't know
for a
me.
minute. I know you. Anyway, where was
Sorry.
I going with this?
Go
I
on.
just had to.
I'm sorry.
No, you're not. Anyway, so so
Having a deja
the-
vu?
no, it's all. Oh yeah, well, we forgot about deja vu. There's it'll come up later. Don't worry. So there is a quote that Carrie-Anne Moss says in the first film, saying it's the question that drives us. And you could argue that the sequels try to answer some things, but I think they're just kind of paying off some things that they already kind of established. A lot of people would say that the sequels in general kind of tamper with the lore a little too much by trying to over-explain things. But I think the second film still strikes that balance pretty well of presenting more of the world, but also keeping some questions and quite a lot of intrigue. There are some zany additional characters. The way they describe how different mythological features are it came up through the centuries, that all these werewolves, vampires are like glitches in the matrix and anomalies, which is an interesting idea. Um, but I don't know how well that's held up in the zeitgeist, at least in terms of the mythos of the Matrix. But I do think there's some great action set pieces, though. The whole highway sequence is an
Yes.
absolute is an absolute like set piece in terms of action films. It absolutely holds up. I don't think it's been outdone until like Mad Max Fury Road, um, in terms of just the scale and all the yeah. It's just a great. I think it's a solid sequel considering how great The Matrix is. It's really hard to beat after making that first film. It's hard to kind of keep up to that quality, and I think this film does a pretty good job of that still.
Yeah, I agree. And I also, I mean, I loved how, the first film, like, it has a pretty, it has a pretty good philosophical current as far as I understand what the film is alluding to. Like, the first film is kind of this adaptation of Plato's Cave. And, that was the sort of theory that if a man was tied to a cave and all he knew was like the shadows on the wall, that if you took him out into the sunlight, I mean, essentially against his will, that he would, he almost might reject it. Like his eyes would have to adjust, and what is real and what is our reality. And this film, Reloaded, I can still see kind of that philosophical current. Like this film is talking about determinism. And what I think is brilliant about it is, like, where the first film is kind of this adaptation of the monument, or I think I said that right, but like the hero's journey, and it's like this is, his sort of rise, and where it's the hero's journey. But this film tries to kind of subvert that, and I think it does it really brilliantly. And I think it's kind of looking at, well, okay, you're the hero, but what does that mean? You have people who are like, worshiping him, like they're giving him gifts,
Because he's Jesus.
Yeah, it's like he's Jesus. And what does that mean for someone? And I feel like the second film gets a little bit too much hate, because it is like, it's probably not as good as the first one, but I think that it is really a satisfying expansion, not only on the lore, but just on the film. I mean, I think the action set pieces are well earned. They're well crafted, probably just as well crafted as the first one. You have memorable characters. You have, like, I mean, there's not much more that you could want from a sequel. It raises the stakes. I thought it was brilliant.
I kind of hate this movie. I did have some fun with it. I'm not gonna lie, I did have some fun with it. I will give you that much. Either just laughing
I'm
at
waiting
the
to
film
be
or
surprised by
enjoying the
anything
car
you say from this point forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Funny, but
like throw us a curveball. Like say you actually like the third one or something when we get to it.
But then I'd be lying. But I
Sure.
just my biggest issue with this movie is that I feel like I missed the movie before watching it. Like it introduced so many characters, like Jada Pinkett.
I feel like you did too.
Yeah, like Jada Pinkett Smith's character, like character that's from Enter the Matrix, couple characters that from Animatrix, and they were treated like they've been there the entire time. But it's like I don't remember you from the first movie. Like, why are you introducing these new characters when I don't personally think the old character
paid better attention to the first
they
movie?
need what should they weren't in the first movie though. Like the new pilot they
didn't
have
need to be.
whose name
No,
is
they
Link,
didn't.
by the way.
I mean,
Ian,
What's
this is basic like writing stuff. Like so he has this new pilot.
So
his
add new
name's
characters that are compelling and add
he-
something
he-
to
he-
the story.
he
They don't add
addresses his
anything.
name saying like, Link, I know you volunteered on this ship, but I must ask you. Like he says in that one sentence in a way that kind of sounds organic, and the way he expresses it, who this new character is, what his name is, and why he's there. Hey, Link, you volunteered to be on this ship, but I need you to trust me. Kind of like
But
in one like couple lines of dialogue, he establishes who this character is and why he's there,
but it,
and then you get a little bit about his family life, and that his wife is very concerned about him being there. I also love the first line that he says when he comes home, "Where's my puss?" And then he sees like the kids there, so he cuts himself off.
yeah,
I mean,
hilarious.
That's very efficient character. I don't need much more than that to get who this person is and why he's there. Like,
That's fine, but
and
I feel like a good
and that he's related to Dozier. Like, if you really pay attention to the dialogue, there's little
yeah, no, I
tidbits
get
in
that.
there
I
that
absolutely
bring you
get
in.
that, but the way they treat them like they've always been there is so weird to me. Like it's just
Well,
that part of it.
it's not weird to me at all
Well, it's
because in
not.
their world they would have been. We're just getting to know them.
But in something like, let's say,
Yeah,
Lord of the
this
Rings
is
Part 2,
also.
where like they introduce new characters, but they're the first time the characters are seeing the characters, so there's more of a justification for them to give exposition. Like when Morpheus said, "All right, you're a pilot, you volunteer on this mission." Morpheus, you already know that. You're telling him information you two already know, just for the audience's sake. But a good
I
sequel
mean, this
like
is like.
Terminator 2 or the Lord of the Rings Two Towers,
I,
like it introduces new characters to the characters that are already
this is like
established.
the most
S-
pedantic nitpicking I have
Oh,
ever
okay.
heard, and I
I have
mean that in the
It is.
much.
best possible
Then
way.
let me go into a much bigger issue I personally have with the movie is that Neo was just not interesting in this movie to me anymore, and that's just because he's completed his arc in the first movie, and he's so overpowered. Like what made the action
Right. Well,
Doing
scenes
his
that's.
Superman thing.
yeah,
Yeah,
like what made the action scenes engaging in the first film was that he did have a struggle. He was barely getting by in each fight, and that was kind of fun to watch. But here, it's like
Okay.
you could just
you
fly
don't think
away
that he
at any moment.
struggled in the fight with the numerous agent
Oh, let's talk about
Smith?
that scene. I think that I personally no, I don't think so. Not that much. Like he doesn't get
He.
bruised or cut or shot or anything. Like and even
Well,
the one
there's
time
no
he does get
guns.
knocked back, he just well, even the one time he does get knocked back, he just gets right back up again. Like it was nothing. Like there was no issues, and the CGI in that scene is so bad. Like it aged so poorly. Just the PS2 cutscene of him spinning around with his pole. I just so many scenes are like that where it's like Neo it just breezes through every
Well,
fight, and it's just
okay,
not
so
interesting for me to watch.
I have
Yeah.
read the people that I think have misinterpreted that scene, and
Oh,
they're
for
talking
God's
about,
sakes! All
well,
right, here, all right,
no,
all
just
right.
hear me out.
No, go
There's
on.
people who have misinterpreted that and are like, well, why didn't he just like blow him up like in the first movie? And I think that
Well, that's
that's
not my
kind of
issue with it.
lost in the context of that, in the second film, Agent Smith basically explains like, I'm not a part of the program anymore. You can't beat me like you did before because I'm a rogue agent and I'm copying myself. And I
Yes.
think that, yeah, it's not as simple as, he's just gonna, put his hand on him like in the first film. And it's also,
I don't care about that.
it gets to a point where there's so many of them and they're overpowering him that he has to escape, and he can't
Yeah.
just do that to begin with because,
He's not fighting an NPC character. He's fighting a virus. Like this. Like
yeah,
he's
exactly.
basically becoming a virus, which is
That's
ironic considering what he mentions in the last film, saying, he has that whole speech with Morpheus saying, I had a revelation where I'm trying to classify your species, where you're not really mammals, you're more like a virus. But then he ends up being a virus, basically in the Matrix,
yeah,
which
I'm,
is
but
I'm
that's
really
not my
Drew,
issue.
please
enjoying
interrupt
seeing-
him.
For God, okay, no, actually, no. First, that wasn't my issue with the scene. My issue was he could have just flown away at any moment. In fact,
No,
it
but he
probably would have been
couldn't
safe.
have,
He's putting
though.
himself at why? What established reason was there for him not to be able to fly away in that
Well,
scene?
so one thing that I find very interesting, I really want to comment on this, is Ian, you and I have very different engagement with that fight scene because clearly it did not hit the effective override of rule of cool for you, but it definitely did for me. I
Fair
love
enough.
sitting back in my chair and watching as my brain goes a little bit fuzzy as I get into things. I love seeing Keanu Reeves jump in and spin kick and like smash cinder blocks over 100 aged CG, but still very Hugo Weaving looking Hugo Weavings. And I
Yes.
love that scene.
It was
I
so
love
boring to me.
I love the bowling pin sound effect they use
What
when
was
you-
that?
Oh, yeah.
That was out of
I
nowhere.
love that because it shows there's a sense of self-awareness and there's a sense of humor about how ridiculous this is. I see it
wish-
as an
yeah.
absurd kind of spectacle of action and CG, and they know it, and they know that's exactly what it is, and I appreciate it
Sure.
for that.
And
And
you know what? one of the things that I look at this as is I also look at, what does Agent Smith represent? He's very establishment. He's very suits and sunglasses. He's Men in Black, but he is the establishment. And so if you're thinking about an unjust society with, corporate and suits lording overhead, and you get to see Keanu Reeves come in and just beat the ever loving crap out of an endless stream of them, that to me even carries some catharsis to it. I've worked in offices, I've worked with very pompous executive people, and for me, seeing these sorts of characters desperately trying to keep their composure while someone very anti-establishment, very free, the one, come in and just like spin kick them into oblivion is so much fun for me. And I want to ask, guys, we've heard some criticism of Marvel movies where I believe it was oh gosh, was it who's the director who criticized Marvel movies for
Martin
being not
Scorsese.
cinema? Yes, Scorsese. Do you guys feel that these movies tread the line of action, set piece, and real cinema well? Because for me, I think that they're very much, one foot in. I think these movies have one foot in both camps of being, a thrill park ride and also an engaging piece of cinema for me.
You could
I,
make an
I, I
argument for the
agree. I,
first
I
film.
believe this was like a transitory kind of period, which in a weird way might play into the trans narrative that they retroactively applied to it. But oh, I'm not going to get there yet. But I do think that it starts off in that kind of cinema world, but because it expands into a franchise from being successful and they expand on this idea, it does kind of turn into that theme park ride that Scorsese uh, has critiqued or noted that the Marvel films are. And it's almost like Marvel kind of came from that idea of these franchise type films. This was like a real
Well,
transitory period between
and
the
I
in the 2000s, going from singular genre films to these expanded universe type movies. And I feel like this series as a whole, and we'll get to the last film when we get to it, but I feel like it's kind of like the almost like the logical conclusion to that. But we'll get to
well,
it.
and I feel like this is actually a lot deeper than some of the Marvel movies. I think there's this entire
I think it
scene
thinks
at
it's
the
deeper.
end that I think of people a lot of them kind of criticized with the architect.
Hmm.
But I think that was actually one of my favorite parts, and I think it's like really well done. And the actor, um, I was trying to find his name. I don't think he's actually been in much besides this, which is unfortunate because I think he's a brilliant actor. But it also kind of fits, that this is like, he's just the Matrix guy. Like
Yeah,
maybe he really
he's
is the
just Colonel
architect. Like
Sanders.
that. Yeah, that kind of adds to the.
Now we've been very passionate. We've been really having some energetic conversation. But I must ask, and I apologize, Stephen, for steering off of you for a second. But I'd love to ask Ian. You have some very strong opinions of these movies. So what is your favorite part of this movie?
Oh, the car chase, because Neo
Ah, the
isn't there.
motorcycles.
Yeah, Neo isn't there, so there's actual stakes and tension in the scene. But it's also incredibly well done and executed. They basically build a freeway out in the middle of a desert. Well, you can't even tell like it's in the middle of a desert. They just shoot it and built it in such a clever way that it just feels like you're going in circles on that highway. So just the amount of work they put into that scene alone, and yeah, the motorcycle is really sick and the music is great in that scene, but I think that's the only scene I enjoyed in this movie. Like, I'm sorry, guys, I'm really struggling to find other things I like beyond some visual aesthetic
Well,
choices.
I think the motorcycle and the highway that they built, like there's actually an hour and a half documentary online that's behind the scenes of
Oh
them
yeah,
literally building this highway, and I think that was the set piece for this entire film. And I think that
oh, it's insane.
yeah, it's
That's
the
where all the
level.
money went.
Well, I think that the level of craftsmanship
Yeah,
that's in that scene in particular
I'd
justifies, the entire film. But I would also
agree.
argue, I think that this film is better than you're giving it credit for on a narrative level. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the scene with, and I was trying to talk about this earlier with Helmut Bucka, Buckitis. I'm probably
Yeah.
butchering that, but he plays the architect, and a lot of people criticize that scene for being too wordy or pedantic.
Too on the
And
nose.
and I think that
That's kind of my
some
issue
of
with
those
it.
well, some of those criticisms might be valid, but I also think that, you know, when you're talking about this being who is essentially God, you know, it's like the God within the machine.
He's
It's
just got that
created all of
sick
the
KFC recipe. That's why.
well, it's I mean, you're not going to expect him to be like, "Yo man, you know, can you dig it?
Yeah.
Like you're going to make this choice or you're going to make that choice."
Well,
Come on,
and
man.
the big revelation that he reveals is the fact that him being the one was a planted thing. Like this revolutionary is embedded into the programming, and is to create this false sense of hope and this false sense of
Well, and
It's
I
just
think that
being
sequel
able
bait.
to
It's
go.
that
just raising the stakes for the sequel. Like that's my problem with it. It's not so much that it's wordy and
but
has
it's
guy giving
brilliant
exposition.
what they're doing because
It
I don't
works
think
well.
so.
well,
Okay.
but you have this you have this moment where you're like, okay, you're the chosen one. You've woke up, like you're the best in the world. And now this film is taking that, subverting it, and being like, no, you're only the chosen one because I want you to be. So you've got the first one is raising the stakes to what is your reality? And the second one is now, well, what is your reality? And maybe you're only woke because they want you to be woke. You know, it's really I think it adds a lot of narrative richness and
I
depth.
I guess if I cared more about the
Yes.
world of the Matrix, like that might just be the main issue with me. Is that it's like if you like the
Hmm.
Matrix, here's more of the Matrix, and it could
Well,
flesh out in some potentially interesting ways. But I guess the issue
I,
is
I
I
I think
just don't
I
care
think you
about the
said it
Matrix
there,
that
Ian.
much.
I think you said it right there, Ian. You don't care about it, so that's a you problem.
That is definitely a you problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fair. I'll accept that.
And and
But
and,
I
and that's
just,
fine.
yeah,
So
I just wish it built more on the characters that were established in the last movie. I guess was my biggest
Well, I
complaint
think
with
it
this.
does. I
I
think
don't
that
think so.
I
It,
think
it ha- it's too overstuffed with too many new characters and too many new ideas. When it's like just stick with the simplicity of the first film, and I would
well,
have
and
liked
they
it
talk
more.
about this in the fourth film, which we'll get to.
Yeah,
We will
You're
get
never
to.
going to please the audience, you know, because
no.
you're
yeah, I agree
you're
with that.
you're making a piece of art, and I've seen Quentin Tarantino talk about this. He was interviewed, and they asked him, uh, "Do you make a film with an audience in mind?" And he said, "Yes, I make it with me in mind." Because I'm the audience. I'm the person who would pay $7 or however much, plus, you know, $10 worth of, you know, a Coke and popcorn to go see this movie. And if I think of if I'm making this for myself and this is the movie I want to make and this is the movie I would pay to see, then that's all that matters. And maybe people resonate with it and maybe people don't. But, you know, I think that that's probably a good, uh, you know, way of thinking if you are a creative artist.
Yeah,
You
I'd
know,
agree
and
with that. Like you're
I
not going to please everybody.
There's a contract stipulation that the Wachowskis had at the time when they were making these sequels, is that they would make them if they didn't have to do any media interviews, and I think that helps them kind of really focus in and hone in on what the story they wanted to tell was, instead of trying to show up somewhere and explain themselves to cameras and try to justify their thing and then have all these people just go back and forth with this pedantic, meandering criticisms over the tiniest details when they're the ones crafting this world. Because I think it's funny, we kind of contribute to the problem here. Just talking about the thing by overanalyzing it, deconstructing it, and trying to put it back together in our own vision. Um, and this is kind of the double-edged sword when it comes to art pieces like this, is when you create an entire world where anything seems possible and then you choose a certain path through it, everyone's going to feel one way or another about that. And I think this is the brilliance of the Matrix franchise as a whole for bringing this up, but also kind of the problem it creates in the same breath is that if everything's possible, then everyone's going to complain that some things didn't happen one way or the other with
Yeah,
these movies.
that's fair.
Yeah.
And I would never expect an artist to pander to my needs. Like, I always say that, people like Michael Bay, they can make whatever movies they want. I could shit on them all day, every day, but, in the end, it's their movie to make. And I
And you
much prefer
will,
that.
Ian. Don't worry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Just
Well, and it,
Ian, my only advice is don't shit where you eat.
yeah,
yeah.
and here's the
Right.
thing, like the Wachowskis, even with the Wachowskis and the Matrix, like I'm glad they made the movie they wanted to make. I would never want to take that away from the artists. I just hope that people can just see my
Work for you, that's fine.
perspective, my point of view. Exactly.
Well, and I mean, it's also kind of funny. I mean, because Ian was talking about, or sorry, Devin was talking about the Wachowskis not doing any interviews, and it reminds me of that kind of memed to death interview where David Lynch is being asked to elaborate on why he thinks Eraserhead is his most spiritual film. And he said, "No, I'm not going to elaborate on that."
Yeah. Yeah,
And it's
Kubrick
just,
did that a lot too.
I
And
think that
I respect that more because
I'd agree.
he's encouraging you to engage with his films on your own personal level rather than look for him for answers. Like art should be accessible to people and they should be up to interpretation. Like people should engage in these things in their own way and not be looking for the creators for their answers. Like the film should suffice as a stepping off point for your own discoveries and your own discussions. And like you can get some insight from the directors, and that might help you kind of find your way into it. But you should really work on finding your own way of understanding and interpreting it.
Exactly.
yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I like I said, I really did. I liked this film. I thought it was a great
I'm glad you aren't
expansion.
just shitting on it like everybody else is. I'm glad you do have your own take on it.
Like you are.
I'm
Like
not.
you are,
I
yeah.
am not shitting on it because everyone shit on it. This movie actually has a pretty decent Metascore. Like it has like a 62 Metascore. Roger Ebert gave this 3.5 stars, so it does have its fans. It's just I'm not one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And trust me, that's not the reason I don't like this movie. I try. Sometimes I can't help it, but I try not to let like critic opinions cloud my judgment. But
So
let's
we
talk
have a
about.
half hour left.
Yeah, I'm
and-
sorry. It's just so much to
and
talk
we
about the
w-
Matrix.
And the Revolutions basically is I would argue is sequential to this. That's why I kind of mushed them together on the banner because they came out the same year, and right after Reloaded ends, Revolution opens up it says to be concluded, and Revolutions is meant to be the grand conclusion to the Matrix trilogy. And
What would you guys rate Reloaded first? Let's get that out of the way.
I think I would. I don't know, Devin. What are you thinking? I'm gonna defer here for a minute.
I'll give it a 7.5. I think it's a good follow-up. Not as monumental as the first film, but I do think it has some great set pieces, and I do think it continues the legacy. Actually, I'm gonna round that up to an 8. It's solid.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's
I think
interesting. I'm a little bit lower actually. I give this a 7.5. I was going to be right there with you. For me, there was, there were there brilliant action for me that I really loved. Some phenomenal choreography, some really excellent fight scene, very innovative stuff. I don't know. I wasn't necessarily as gripped with the multi-layered storytelling in this one compared to the first one, so it only gets a 7.5 out of 10 from me.
Drew, I feel bad. I feel like I've been talking over you too much tonight.
Oh, it's fine.
I feel bad.
no, I'm well, I'm gonna give this an 8. I'm gonna be right with Devin. I think that it does do some brilliant things with the lore. I think it kind of subverts the original narrative, and I thought it was a really brilliant continuation of a story that I really liked. It does have its flaws, it does have its problems, but not too much to kind of spoil my enjoyment of it. Very well made, very well crafted. I had fun with it. Yeah, an 8.
I really liked seeing the city of Zion that they keep talking about because they only talk about it in the first one, and you can imagine like what that is, and maybe your
Well,
imagination is better than
yeah,
what's on screen. But I like showing the Last Human City and
Yeah.
the everyone talks shit about like the cave scene and the whole rave and subtly hinted at orgy.
Okay,
I,
so
I
that wasn't a fever
but,
dream. That scene
but
happened.
no, but what I like is the lighting in that scene because everyone's skin looks
Sure.
bronze
Yeah.
and it shows. I don't know. There's a whole thing about like melanin and whatnot, but I do think I like the fact that the lighting makes everyone look like similar, and it shows that we have
well,
more similarities and things in common than not, and I
and
like
see,
that kind of humanistic element of it.
I was going to bring this up also, and I know we need to get going, but one thing that I loved in particular about Reloaded that I thought was a really interesting thing they did was as they're showing this, this sort of dance sequence, this rave party that's intercut with Neo and Trinity. They're having like a sex scene, and I thought that it
Hmm.
was really interesting how that was shot
You,
because it's almost like you don't know where one of them begins and the other one ends. There's this sort of weird androgynous like
that was why did
mass
that it's
Beast
so
with two
quality.
weird.
backs
That
kind of
that whole
thing.
scene just felt like it was just an excuse to push more techno music.
No, no,
100%.
but
And what's
I'm
wrong with
okay with
that?
that.
I think that there's
I'm
some
sure you
brilliance
were.
to
The,
that
the more
because
techno orgies on screen in my
Hey,
movies, the better.
Drew, you get to see
well,
You
I
get to see Keanu Reeves' ass, so
well,
you
no,
can't
I
complain.
think that I
Well,
think that
is it Keanu's or is it Carrie-Ann Moss's? At this point,
Or
I
is
don't
it
care. I'm
stunt
just happy
double's
to see.
ass? Yeah.
well, yeah, no, I think that there's some brilliance to that. I think maybe there's some kind of deeper meaning
Or
based on the Wachowskis, and
Fair
the
enough.
some
way their lives sort of turned out. I think maybe there's some kind of oneness
some
between.
deeper metaphors at play too. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think it
yeah,
was just
definitely.
a
So,
weird sex scene.
Revolutions. Who
Reloaded
wants
gets
to
a
introduce this one?
3.5. I'll introduce Revolutions.
Wow,
No, I'll be
what a
safe.
lukewarm rating.
Yeah, I'll give it a warm introduction. Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Revolutions, that is the wrong text. Sorry, having some technical difficulties.
Oh, Reloaded also introduces Mommy. I mean, Monica
Oh,
Bellucci.
yeah, I forgot
Yeah,
to mention. Yeah.
yeah,
And
she
also
is.
makes a girl orgasm from a cake. Moving on to Revolutions.
Yeah, no, no.
Smooth
Oh.
segue.
I hear Monica Bellucci. I hear her and her husband were expecting at one point, and if they were going to have a daughter, they were going to name it after the mother, Monica.
Oh.
But if they had a son, they were going to name it after the father. Lucky Bastard was going to be. that's a Norm Macdonald. Anyway,
Wow.
In another life, there's not a universe for that. Revolutions is the epic conclusion to the Matrix trilogy. Everything is leading up to this moment. Neo is dead and he's in purgatory, awaiting for a train. Super subtle, but I guess it works fairly well. There's other problems with that scene that I'll get into, but the concept of it's
I
kind of
love how
cool.
that scene opens up. I
It,
just
it,
wanted
it
to mention,
looks
but go on.
cool, but on the other hand, it's also about Neo's struggle to reunite with Morpheus and Trinity. Neo has a plan to go to the Machine City to get rid of Agent Smith once and for all and to build a truce with the machines, while the machines are committing their assault on Zion, so Zion are desperately trying to defend themselves in the meantime, with all of these crazy looking mech suits and lots of screaming and gunfire and explosions. It's the end, basically. This is the epic conclusion, and can we at least admit this is the worst one? Can we all agree on that, at the very least?
Are we including the fourth? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, because my criticisms and comments of this one are actually rather brief. I actually like this one about as equally as the second one.
Really?
Maybe I'd only give it a 7, not a 7.5, but I really admire them for even like trying at all because we know what hype does to a franchise. So, yes, there's and we will talk about our criticisms, but for me, the spectacle of it all, the amount of effort, the time and technical sophistication to have so many sentinels on screen at once, visualizing a machine-made city, the mythological backdrop that the characters exist within, all of it actually works for me very well. And so I don't have much to criticize. People with, you know, the two henchmen who were like albinos with dreadlocks, not
Yeah.
very fond of them. But other than that,
They aren't in
this
the
movie
third
has
movie.
one of my favorite one-liners in the entire franchise. And you guys, we don't have to talk about the context yet, but I freaking adore when Neo turns to Trinity and says, "You'll have to drive."
Heh, that was kind of funny.
That is
Yeah.
one of my favorite one-liners in this franchise.
Fair enough.
Well,
What about you, Steven?
okay, if we're including the fourth one
Include.
also, yeah, I think this might be my least favorite. I think that it has a lot of good ideas. And I think, like Drew said, I admire the audacity of the Wachowskis.
I admire the ambition. Yeah.
To even try this.
Yep.
Because they're even like they're drawing from cyberpunk, they're drawing from Japanimation, they're drawing from Hong
Dragon
Kong
Ball Z,
action
yeah.
and Eastern philosophy and Christianity and the monomyth and all of this, like, they're trying to put it together cohesively. And I think that, yeah, there's a lot of good ideas in this. I love the idea that there's a scene in this where, kind of going into what Drew was talking about with the you'll need to drive. So the story kind of picks back where the last one left off. There is a character who has been infected by Agent Smith in the real world. And when we last left off, which I'm not even going to get into, but in the last movie, they have this kind of like two characters, and it's Neo and this Agent Smith possessed character next to each other, lying on a table, and that's how it ends. It's like, to be concluded. And then the next film opens up, and Keanu Reeves, he has to take this machine ship on like a mission because this is the last stand. They're going to finally fight the machines. And of course, this other character, who is actually Agent Smith, wakes up around this time, and they get into a fight. And that is like one of the best fights of like the series, I would say.
Yes.
Really?
It's
very-
so brutal seeing them
It's-
like fight.
Yeah.
But
Well,
The consequences feel much more grounded, and the stakes
I'll give
feel
you
much
that.
more
Yeah.
realistic.
Right.
I think, and just seeing like a machine possessing a human mind, and him saying like, "Look past these cow gelatin eyes and see the eyes of your enemy." I mean, a little cheesy, but it works. It works for me, and
It-
it
well,
just
and I think
it's the best fight scene in the
does
movie.
It does something really well that I think the rest of this movie
Yeah.
doesn't quite do, which is it returns the films to a more kind of grounded sense.
Yeah, there's actual
Mhm.
stakes.
But yeah, there is, and it feels like it has more weight. And this guy picks up the big, like, I don't think it's like a lead piece of metal or lead pipe or something, and he smashes into Neo's face, and Neo is blinded. And I thought that in and of itself, where Keanu Reeves has to tie a bandage around his eyes
While
and he
fighting the
can't.
guy.
Yeah, there's something brilliant about that, and actually, the Criterion Collection released like I think it's like 25 films or something. Like, I don't know if it was a box set or if it was exclusive to their streaming service, but it was like an older series of films from Japan that was about like Zaitochi, the blind swordsman. And I thought that whole idea of like he's the one and he has to see through, like he's almost seeing energy, it's not like he's He's not seeing with his eyes; he's seeing with like his third eye. I thought that was
Yeah.
fucking brilliant. And
I like that a lot,
I will
and
admit,
I
yeah,
like the I like the stuff that Smith says, saying, the blind messiah. It's very endemic of your whole species, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
yeah,
that's
no,
very
and
it's
Smith.
lines like that that I didn't understand when I first heard them. When I saw this, I haven't seen this film in like ever since it came out, and a lot of it went over my head. Some of it still does, but lines like that suddenly, like, oh, I get what he means now. Damn, that's actually a little more poignant than I
Yeah,
realized. So going back and rewatching these sequels, I'm like, people shit on these unnecessarily for no reason. Or I do think
well,
the dialogue gets a little overridden and it is a little flowery, and it makes it sound more complex and more, um, you know, and more pretentious. I'm using your tally there, Ian. You can't say that word now. It does make it sound
that's
more
lame.
pretentious than it is, but really at its core, I still think it's solid. I still think that the execution of these ideas are solid. It's just a little overwritten in the dialogue, but at its core,
Yeah,
the core tenets are still solid pillars to me.
true. I
well,
I
and
agree,
always
Steven. That's the best fight scene in the movie, and I like how there's actual stakes in the fight, and there's a consequence from it. The moment before it is so dumb because the guy is like, Mr. Anderson, you tried to kill me before, but I don't know how you got up. And Chaos like, what? What are you talking about? And then 5 minutes later, he realizes it's Agent Smith.
I
Who
will
else
concede that they
calls?
took him a while to figure that out. Like the second he said Mr. Anderson, it should have clicked.
Yeah,
That's the only bit
exactly.
I'll concede.
Yeah.
But okay.
t-
Other than that, Drew, you were gonna say something.
all I wanted to ask is that I really want to know about Steven's opinion on the character of the Merovingian. As a young Canadian kid growing up, in school we have to try at least and learn French, and so the Merovingian was the closest I'd seen to a character who liked the language of French.
well,
he
no, I
did
mean,
not have a real French accent, though. Not even remotely.
well, okay, so here's the thing about this film, and Devin actually posted a link to a YouTube video, and it was by a YouTuber named I think it was Entertain the Elk. I think was the guy's
Yeah.
name.
Yep.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and the video was called "When Did the Matrix Die?" And I kind of alluded to this. He had his own theory, and there is a point in this story where I think everyone kind of agrees that it kind of falls off a little bit. But watching these for the first time, I managed to pinpoint where I fell out of this. And so there's a scene in like the first act of Revolutions. And I think it's right maybe before the blinding, fight where he's fighting the Agent Smith in the real world. It's right before that when it starts out. You've got him in the train station. You've got to get him out. They've got to go to the Merovingian. They have to go to him and ask him to open up the train station. The train man is there. There is this brilliant scene that's set in like almost like a BDSM club, and there's like these.
Or attack the music.
No,
Which,
and
which isn't a mistake. The Wachowskis were into that shit.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
they're
no,
also into
definitely.
BDSM, and
Um,
there's like bondage mercenaries with like covers over their
yeah,
face that are
There's
like
no,
there's
holding guns to their head.
there's a titty twist scene, which I'll admit I freeze frame more than once when I was a kid.
no, and there's also this. Well, it reminds me almost of like Clive Barker's Hellraiser, you know,
I guess,
and
yeah.
Mhm.
He was in that
yeah,
too,
and
though.
it's brilliant, and I loved it, and I thought this is going great, and then they get to a part where they're like, "We need you, if you're going to, like get your friend out, I want you to go cut out the Oracle's eyes." And then, for no reason almost at all, Trinity is like, "No, we're not going to do that." And she just pulls a gun at him.
Yeah, it didn't even
I
matter.
mean, and it really cut all of the narrative tension. And
Yeah,
I
that would
think
have been an interesting thing.
immediately,
Yeah.
well, and Monica Bellucci at that point, like she's there for one scene, and her entire like purpose is
So
to
that's why you
say,
don't like it.
no, just listen. Like her entire purpose is just to say, like, she'll do it. She loves him. And from that point on, I think the next scene after that is like Agent Smith, and there's like he's just going insane over this like plot.
He
This like
laughs
fight
maniacally. He's just a maniacal
of
bad guy
puppies,
in this
and
movie.
he's like deliberately purposeful. And it's that to me was where I think the plot got lost, and I didn't quite know what I was watching anymore.
Well, here's the thing:
so-
in both the Matrix sequels, they just turn like Agent Smith got what he wanted out of the first movie. Like technically, his arc was done as well. He wanted to escape the Matrix, just like the others, and he got his chance to do so. So everything he does in the sequels are just he's just a bad guy because we need an epic bad guy in our epic
Well,
trilogy.
no, I mean I don't agree with
So
that. but
he's
I
just
also-
maniacal and over the top and just one dimensional.
Do you think he really wanted out of the Matrix and to get to Zion, like, or was that just what he was saying to try to get an answer out of Morpheus?
I think he
'Cause-
generally wanted. Well, I guess I prefer to think it that way because it does give him some depth to his character, and it's like okay, like you said, Joe
Like the-
Pantoliano gives him an interesting motivation. But in the sequels, he's just so one-dimensional and cartoony. It kind of reminds me of how like Endgame treated Thanos over Infinity War, and people's issue of him kind of becoming more one-dimensional and maniacal. This is like that, just taken to the nth degree.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I don't know. I think that like for some reason, I mean, I liked his sort of villainous turn in Reloaded. I disagree with you. I think he had some purpose in Reloaded.
He had
but I think
more purpose.
Revolution. Well, in Revolutions, I mean, you talk about like the first film, and you can very clearly, and I talked about this earlier with the philosophical current. So the first one is the monomyth. The first one is Plato's cave. The second one is dealing with subverting the monomyth and determinism. And the third film, I can't find the current. I can't find what it's exactly about.
It's just a
And it
payoff.
feels-
It's just the
well,
final act.
I think it's basically I see it as a sequential continuation of the second one. That's why I kind of put them together. They both came
Well,
out
and
the same year.
I
They were
think
filmed
that
back
it's
to back.
I think that it's dealing with fatalism, which is kind of the opposite of determinism, but it doesn't I don't know, it doesn't quite work.
It doesn't do anything
And-
with those ideas.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean,
Well-
and you think about like in the first one, I can name the action scenes, I can name the set pieces, and the second one we
Mhm.
talked about that big, highway chase.
Yeah.
And like the third one, it tries to do that, and it does succeed in that one sequence with the
The agents.
the blindings, the Agent Smith
The
fight.
betrayal. Yeah.
Yeah, but then
It just turns to
After-
pure schlock. Like it just turns to pure schlock and just showing off
but
special
after
effects.
that, it's like the scene where the oh god, the machines are like rising up, and they're it's like these big ugly blobs, and it's just
It
it's
looks
so gross
bad.
and gray, and it doesn't have the same narrative weight. It doesn't look as good. I can't connect with the stakes,
Yeah.
like these big robot mech suits. There's something about it. I don't know, and it was quite a disappointment. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I can imagine how people would feel disappointed. Just the funny thing is, like the mech suits, every kind of mech suit is like screaming constantly, and I just thought that was really funny for some reason. The captain especially was just like, ah, ah,
Oh,
ah."
bless
even
Captain Mifune.
even when he gets sliced up, he's still screaming. It feels like a bad Godzilla English dub where Like, the
Oh, man.
actors have no idea what they're doing. Like, they're clearly just sitting in front of a green screen and they have no idea what they're reacting to. So they're just like, all right, just scream and then press the trigger for 50 minutes and we'll just splice the footage together and hope to God that it fits. And, like, it's
Now,
just
speaking
constant
of,
screaming.
I'm thinking of stakes you do connect with. All the way back from Matrix 1, I want some steak to plug me back into the Matrix. Lads,
Yes,
is it time we address Matrix Resurrections?
Are,
I
are we
think
already
so. I
done
think
with
we got.
Revolutions?
I think so, but let's
We
go
we, we,
ahead
we we
and
have
rate.
we have like 5 minutes in our normal clock.
All
We're gonna
right.
go a little over time, but
Okay, 2 out of 10 for the
Resurrections.
Revolutions.
Or Revolutions.
Let's rate it real quick. 2 out of 10 for Revolutions. It's a piece of shit, but I laughed at it a lot. So, there you go.
I'm gonna give it a 7. I think for better or for worse, it concluded the franchise the way it was meant to be. It's not as memorable as the other two films, but it works and it's got some scenes.
It's
Uh,
got some scenes.
Steven,
It's
what would you rate it?
I will. I will be a little less forgiving. I think I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. I feel like I'm being a little generous here. This
Mhm.
was
Let the hate flow for you.
unfortunately, yeah, this was unfortunately kind of a disappointment. So
Speaking of which, let's talk about Matrix Revolutions or
Resurrection.
Resurrections.
So you admit
Resurrection.
it. Okay. Drew, take it away.
I didn't admit a damn thing yet. Go on.
So,
Love you too.
this is, if our audience is listening in this late, then you know what? There's no holds barred on spoilers now. Matrix Resurrections is the story of the unexpected continuation of the Matrix saga, where we discuss the literal and figurative resurrection of the story, cast, and characters. Matrix Resurrection centers around Neo being a man who's grappling with what is real and what isn't. The movie establishes him as a real life person who works in a game design studio, the Matrix being his intellectual property and most cherished product. From there, the story spirals and unravels as Neo tries to grapple with, is his life really what he remembers it being? Is the Matrix real? It's an extremely meta commentary of a movie with a lot of unexpected moments in it, for me in particular. And I'll be honest, I did enjoy myself. This is not the Matrix that I expected, but that's actually what I asked for. The last thing I wanted to see watching this movie was some absolutely dead and bland rehashing, a soulless corporate remake, and this movie subverted my expectations and dove off in enough 90-degree angles that I had a good time with it. I'm sure we'll hear your thoughts in just a second, but I really gotta say, I had fun with this movie for several reasons.
Mhm.
The I actually really like Keanu Reeves acting in this movie. I think he's fun. I genuinely love Carrie Ann Moss in this movie. I know she's got like nowhere near enough screen time, and we will get to him. But my favorite character in this movie was actually Neil Patrick Harris,
I'd agree with
and
that.
I need to know
yes,
what you guys think.
I'd agree.
Yeah, Doogie Howser did a good job here. This movie is a hot steaming mess, and it is a product of a time of what that I like to dub the sequel apocalypse, where all these corporate entities are trying to rehash and resurrect their franchises to try to milk as much money out of them as possible by needlessly bringing back these characters to life. This is something Warner Brothers has been bugging the Witch House, which they actually mention in the film. And the only reason that this film came to be is Lana Wachowski and Lily Wachowski, both their parents had passed away not far apart from each other. And it was at that point that Lana said, that's when these two characters kind of came back to life for her, and that's when she wanted to revisit this. This film was not really planned; it was just kind of done, and it is an absolute hot mess, showing the worst parts of corporate kind of consumerist greed trying to rehash franchises, and I love it because it acknowledges that fact and it makes it's like a perfect logical conclusion to this era of filmmaking, and I hope it serves an example of why you should be pushing original ideas and not trying to rehash old ones. I think that this is a brilliantly stupid and stupidly brilliant film. I think it's the best and worst thing Lana Wachowski has ever made, and I think it yeah, I don't know.
Ooh.
I love this film for all the wrong reasons. And I love the fact that everyone hates it for the exact reasons it was made.
Okay.
That's a
Well,
really darn good summary, in my opinion.
That's a
Darren.
fun summary.
Thank you.
I
I
really like that.
enjoyed the shit out of this movie for all the wrong reasons.
I'm proud of
And
you.
well, so
yeah.
I watched this. I watched like all three of the original Matrix films over the week. And then
Yeah.
Tuesday night, I started this film. And I actually did the same thing that they talked about on the Red Letter Media review, where I
Yeah.
started it the first night and I was like, it's too late. I need to like get some sleep and come back to this. And so the next morning, I came back and I finished it. And yeah, I think this film is an absolute disaster, but there's something about it that I can't like look away from. It is it is absolutely a disaster. It's a catastrophe. It doesn't make sense. And I feel like the film is kind of on the audience's side a little bit. Like, we don't want to be here either. And I was surprised by how self-deprecating this film was and how self-aware it was. And it's like I fully understand and acknowledge that this film is Lena Wachowski did not want to make this. Keanu
This was
Reeves.
her processing grief, basically. This is her.
Well, she said that, but I think what it actually was, I think that the studio came to them and was like, "We're going to do this with or without you."
Can we talk
And that
about that
actually
scene?
becomes a plot point in
Yes.
the film.
Yes, talk about that scene.
But it's like, no, they were, I mean, even as far back as like 2017, there was articles about like they're going to remake this with Michael B. Jordan, the guy from Black Panther. And it's like,
And Space Jam.
yeah, no, but there's something about this that like I I don't I don't think this is by any means a great movie. I don't even think that it's necessarily a great Matrix movie. But if I had to choose between this or, we're going to have some newbie guy come in with like 15 studio heads over his head trying to tell you what the audience thinks they want. And we're
Like
going to
EA
get like
games.
Dwayne The Rock Johnson as Morpheus or something like
Yeah, Kevin Hart as
yeah,
Trinity.
I would definitely choose this. Yeah, it's a clusterfuck, and I kind of admire its audacity.
I admire
I
it,
think
yeah.
I think Lana, after burying her parents, said, "Fuck it, I'm gonna bury this franchise," and it's gonna
Well,
like I'm going down with the ship, and I absolutely admire it for that.
well,
And
it's kind of like they can't ask me to do another one if the last one is the worst possible movie.
Yeah.
People talk about in comparing this to Joe Dante's Gremlins 2. And we
Gremlins 2 is
the
way more
channel.
clever.
I mean, I wasn't there the last episode where you guys talked about Back in Action, but that film especially like just rips apart studio executives, and Steve Martin is essentially this evil mustache twirling studio executive
He's Harvey
villain who
Weinstein.
doesn't understand the audience.
Hmm.
And I think that this film is it's not good, but it's not necessarily bad. Like, I don't know. I think that
I think it's unfortunately a product of what it also aims to criticize, and that's these
Yeah, that's kind
corporate,
of my big
shallow
issue with it.
rehashing of movies. But I think at the least there is a heart to it where they are trying to do their best with the material, and it is coming from like that kind of place. But the motivations behind it are different, and all these things. And I feel like it might unfortunately become more relevant in the future. We just don't quite see it yet.
Yeah.
And
Well,
There's some
that
really
was
poignant commentary that Neil Patric's characters make because he's the analyst and he's kind of like saying how people's motivations are not by, well, this where it kind of plays into the whole social media thing. It's like facts don't care about your feelings and feelings don't care
oh,
about your
can
facts.
we talk about that he's basically a cartoonish caricature of Ben Shapiro?
I
He's
didn't
like,
think of it that way.
theoretically and hypothetically, if you were in the Matrix, I mean, it's also, I mean, I kind of love that, and I don't know if anyone has specifically talked about this in regards to reviewing the film, but to me, it really does a good job of representing the kind of political divide in our culture. And I thought that what was genius about it as a satire is that on one hand, yes, you have this plucky teenage girl who's like a fangirl who, the film even makes a point to kind of like mock her and be like, no, you're a young kid. You don't know what you're fighting for. You have no idea. Like, go home. How could you resurrect Neo? Like, you're an idiot. You're a young idiot and you mean well, but you just go away. And it's
Or
like
annoying.
that is
Yeah.
the sort of left wing, like woke, like she's like I mean, she's even got like the short
She's
blue
got the Karen
kind of
haircut.
social
Yeah.
justice haircut. And then on the other side, yeah, you have Neil Patrick Harris, who's sort of this like dude bro, and he's like a Ben Shapiro guy, and he even says sheeple in the movie.
Yeah.
And it's
Yes.
We gotta talk about the writing in this movie.
well, but hold on. I mean, I think the film is kind of brilliant because it doesn't necessarily take a side with either of them. It just
Mhm.
like, and I don't know, man. It's kind
I
of,
thought it was pretty one-sided
yeah.
against Neil Patrick
It's
Harris,
not.
but
It's
No.
not like New Nightmare, but
no, it's
it,
no New Nightmare. It's no Back in Action, which is
I
funny
think
to
it's
say.
quite. I think it's quite like New Nightmare. Actually, I think it's the new
Really?
New
New
Nightmare is
Nightmare.
so much more
It's a
creative than this.
it's a Neo Nightmare.
Yeah,
I think New Nightmare is a lot more.
a lot more
I don't know,
creative and
good,
a lot more
but
genuinely good. Yeah.
Ah, I don't know. This movie was not at all what I expected. I purposely tried to not expect anything, and I was just blown away by it. And it does feel hashed together in some way, but I like that it is kind of an antithesis to a lot of these other corporate things. Like even though it's a product of what it satirizes, I do think it satirizes those things well. I was cackling throughout the entire uh, meeting scenes, like the whole montage of them trying to define what makes the Matrix. Because I imagine Larry and Andy and Lana and Lily, all four of those people, have heard those meandering criticisms go back and forth, and other people trying to define what their whole world is, and it just gets it's an
well,
absurdity, and I love the
and
fact that they put a spotlight on that.
and that to me, I think that's what really kind of hits home about this movie is that if you look at it as a Matrix movie, it's even worse than it actually is. And I think that's a lot of the sort of disappointment that you're seeing on social media is people going into this, and rightfully so, expecting this kind of continuation of the story and tying things up in a nice little bow and making it just perfect. But this isn't a
This isn't
Matrix
that movie.
movie in the
Yeah.
traditional sense. What this is it's using the Matrix as a narrative vehicle to satirize and mock current Hollywood.
I can respect the ambition behind that, but my problem with this movie is that it just doesn't do it well. Like you compared it
And
to
I
New
mean, that's
Nightmare, but
fair,
New Nightmare is
but
so much more creative than its fourth wall breaks. Like that's
I agree,
I imagine
but
that he had more support though. Like I don't know. Like I don't know how much.
this movie had a
Like he,
$185 million budget. How is
So
that
here's
not
well,
something
you
that's
support?
gotta
been on my
remember.
mind, though. Devin had an excellent comment about how he went into this movie, and the way that I went into this movie, I actually would. We didn't include this one because 5 movies in a row is way too much. But my second favorite Matrix movie is the Animatrix,
I
and
can
I
see
love
that.
it because it's just anything that it darn well wants to be. So I went into this movie not framing it as a logical and flawless continuation of what should be a very concluded story, but rather as a Twilight Zone, a what if, an animatrix film with a lot longer of a runtime than 25 minutes. And that, looking at it through that lens of just a what if, is really what let me enjoy this movie so much. For me, Matrix concluded back in the early 2000s with Matrix Revolutions. That was, it was good. It was fine. They had giant mechs and a million rendered squid monsters that ended up like melting half a studio's computers. That was the end for me. So when I saw Resurrections, I think it will probably help audiences to look at it much more like a what if story rather than a set in stone continuation of the story.
And I have no problem
Yeah.
with that. And I
I
appreciate the
absolutely
film
agree.
trying to be like a bit more clever than just a generic sequel. But it's the fourth wall breaking that is actually my least favorite part about the movie, because when you just go, oh, if we just admit that we're bad and we admit that studios are running out of ideas and that this is a generic sequel, then nobody can blame us. However, the big problem with this movie is that it's a product of the thing they're mocking, like you said, and that just drove me nuts. Like the film was
Which
just so far up its
I
own
put more
ass.
blame on the studio than on Lana in that
I
case, Joseph.
fully
They
put
Well,
blame on Lana.
so
they're the ones that were bugging her about it over the years because
Yeah,
okay, so
they
so
yeah.
I have a question,
yeah.
and I'm going to pose this to Ian.
Please do.
All right. Okay.
Go ahead.
Because I know you don't like the franchise, but hear me out. Okay. So let's say, just like hypothetically, right? I'm just
Yeah.
not going into my Ben Shapiro impersonation, but let's say that you make a film, a trilogy of films,
Mhm.
and put yourself in Lena's shoes here, right?
Yep.
You have made a trilogy of films that, like, whether I like it, whether Devin likes it, whether Drew likes it, like, no matter whatever, you have gotten to a place in your career where you have made three massive blockbuster films that, for better or worse, have entered the cultural zeitgeist, that have influenced almost every piece of media since then.
Mhm.
Okay? And the
Sure.
studio calls you in, and it's been 20 years. You don't want to do this. You've moved on.
Yeah.
And so the option is almost red pill, blue pill. You can do what, we want you to do, which is you do whatever you want and you try to continue what you've already decided is finished, or we bring someone else in here and they're going to screw up everything. You can either be self-aware about that and at least try to give this film series that you've dedicated almost half of your life to, like, you can try to give it some dignity and try to poke fun at the entire situation, or you can watch someone bastardize your original vision. And I think that is the mindset that you need to put yourself in. And I'm curious, what would you do?
My thing is, if you lose passion for a franchise, it's time to move on. As terrible as that sounds, as terrible as it sounds for someone else to ruin the franchise that you created, it's time to move on. Because I feel like if you lose passion for something, you need to move on to something else. Like it's the same situation with TV shows getting bad over the years, or bands kind of losing their mojo. They're just going on much longer than they wanted to, and sure, someone else can interpret their work and screw it up, but at least you could say you weren't the one who screwed it up. You could at least say, I ended things on a good note, I'm happy with what I created, I can move on to new projects.
Well, and
I can
see,
move on with my life.
I
And
mean,
that's
that's
personally
a
what I go
hell of a
for.
decision to make.
It's a tough
Mm.
decision, don't
And
get me wrong,
it's
but that's what I would
and
personally do.
and that's what they have been doing for the last 20 years, Ian, because Warner Brothers have been asking them constantly over the years with this. They pulled up trucks full of money to their to their house. That's how they put it anyway.
Yeah.
And they've said no every single time. The only thing that like pushed her over the edge is the fact that their parents died, and for her, Neo and Trinity, those two characters kind of came back into their mind, and so that passion was found again, and they kind of used
I
it as a
don't
vehicle to
think
kind
it
of
was here.
criticize the whole situation. No, that's what she says in the interview. That's what it came out of. It came out of a grief, and it came out of needing this kind of
Came
comfort
out of
again.
desperation, and that's what it feels like. It
I
feels
don't
like
think it's
somebody who
desperation
it
as
feels like
much as it
somebody
is.
who moved on from a project they left a
It's
very long time
it
ago, and they came back with a very different perspective, a very different mindset, and not necessarily a good one, in my opinion. Like the
it
Matrix
came
is,
from mourning. It came from grief.
yeah,
I
exactly.
think
It
it
didn't come
came
from a good
from.
place.
I would agree with that. I think that the first few films are coming from a place of optimism and a sort of
And I'd agree with that.
like hopeful eye.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is more
It's
cynical.
spiteful.
And
It
it's
reminded me of Ryan
older.
Johnson with The Last Jedi. It just feels very
Mhm.
spiteful and angry.
I wouldn't
Well,
quite call
to an
it that,
extent.
but
I
I
wouldn't
kinda
call it that
would,
either.
yeah.
And I was going to mention George Lucas as someone that did move on. He sold all the rights to Star Wars, and then Disney did that stuff with them. So
Yeah.
well, and I mean maybe that was maybe that was for the best after the prequels. I don't know.
You gotta remember,
Well,
George Lucas did the prequels.
I mean, I think they get overhated, and I feel the same about the Matrix sequels. But this is, I don't know. Like I said, if I had to pick between this and trying to reinvent the wheel with someone else trying to retread like what we've already seen in this not as self-aware way, yeah, I mean, I would go with this. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's Keanu Reeves isn't 30 years old anymore. The fight scenes here are kind of lame. The cinematography is not great. As far as the actual narrative, like not the sort of meta commentary that's mostly in the first
The
act,
music
but
is
like
so
throughout
forgettable.
the recovering trinity from the Matrix and that whole stuff. I don't know that I understood all of it, and I don't know that maybe I was supposed to.
And to
But
add light to the situation, let's talk about some choice lines of dialogue. Hey, it's alright, this is an old friend. Hello, old friend. What? I think, Devin, you literally just said what as soon as that scene came up.
Well,
oh yeah, there are a few moments like that, but I literally had a grin on my face through like 2/3
Oh,
of
I
this
know.
movie.
I know.
yeah, and I mean, you could like really try to give them some credit here and say that that's like kind of like that Will Smith, like, so what? We're some kind of Suicide Squad.
Yeah,
maybe
it's
they're
funny.
knowingly.
I'll give it that. It's entertaining, but I find this
Yeah,
movie the most boring out of all the Matrix movies to
and
me.
I
Like,
think
there's just nothing
that's
holding this together, and I was
I
falling
think that that's
asleep. Going.
maybe valid. I mean, I could definitely understand because going into this, I was honestly like disappointed that they didn't keep the whole, blind swordsman thing. Like, I was so disappointed when you found out that his
Yeah, he
eyes
just
had
uses
been
the
corrected.
force. He just uses
And
the
it,
force for the second half of the movie, and that's it.
yeah, but I mean, it's also funny because any kind of criticism that you could level at this film, it's like it's already thought of that, like it's
Yeah,
already making fun of any kind of
Then don't be a
reaction that you're going
product
to
of
have
your
at this.
criticisms.
The other, like, there's a post-credit scene after this where they go back to the boardroom scene, and all of the people at Warner Brothers are like, what if it's just cat videos and we call it the Catrix?
It's
yeah.
just a
I
meme.
feel like
Like, the movie
that's
is just a meme
very
at this point. Doesn't
I
the Neo guy dab at some point or do a weird dance?
Y- y-
It's trying
You
way
know,
too hard to be
when I
funny.
saw all the poster art for this, I thought it was like bad fan art. Like when I saw like the first initial posters
It
for it
looks so bad.
that were coming out, which I think was intentional, possibly. I don't know.
I think so.
Anyway,
That's probably
we
giving
have
too
to
much
we
credit.
have to wrap up here.
That was a
This
good
movie's a
discussion,
hot
though.
mess, and I loved every second of it. I give it a 6.9.
Nice. What about you,
Ooh.
Drew?
Honestly, I'm very close to that. I think this one gets a 5 out of 10 for me. There was good stuff here and I did enjoy a lot of it, and I think that I was helped by having a very relaxed mindset going into this. So 5 out of 10 for me.
3 out
Nice.
of 10.
Uh,
There's
I
some nice cinematography.
I
That's about
think
it.
a disaster. It's an absolute train wreck, and I couldn't take my eyes off of it. So, for
That's
better or
Revolutions
worse,
for me.
I'm gonna give it a 6.9 out of 10. This is, I don't know, man. It's 100% terrible, and I kind of love it. In spite of
it's a bad
It-
movie,
it
but it has
reminds-
it's
personality.
everything.
I get that.
No,
It
I love
reminds
how
me-
people just put so much praise on Spider-Man and then shit on this when they're both a product of the same thing.
Well, and I don't know, man.
There's
I
more
mean, Neil
narrative
Patrick
justification
Harris'
for it.
character, like
Yeah.
he steals every scene he's
he's
in,
very fun.
and
Does.
there's a lot of good ideas in this. There's a lot of interesting, things that they're kind of playing with, and I don't know. It's hard for me to just definitively come out and say that this is like bad in the traditional sense.
Mhm.
And I do
I feel
wonder,
like
because
yeah.
well, hold on. I do wonder because Keanu Reeves made the statement to Lena while they were filming this and as he was watching it, that, I saw this interview and she said that, his reaction was that The Matrix influenced the next 20 years of cinema. And he wondered if maybe this would influence the next 20 years. And I do wonder, is this a situation like Southland Tales or something that's like not quite found its footing, but it's maybe
Only time will tell.
it's maybe ahead of its time.
Time will
And
tell.
I wonder if 20 years from now, like, we're going to go back and rewatch this and be like, oh shit, they were so on to something.
They were right. Yeah. And they were right all along.
Yeah.
You never know.
And-
like it all depends
don't
on what
know.
happens in the next 20 years.
I don't know.
It's interesting to think about, though.
Yeah.
We should come back and review it then.
Yeah, you know what?
Yeah.
I feel like we need another episode where we talk about revolutions and resurrections, because we didn't get enough time to talk about that. I wasn't done shitting on revolutions.
Oh,
Well-
Drew, I want to invite you back whenever we get to Animatrix, because I think that is an episode worthy of time to really take time with, and maybe we'll pair it with some other animated anthologies. I'd love to pair it with like the Blade Runner short films that they did.
Oh,
there you go.
yeah, that's a good idea. Or no, the Star Wars anime. We could do the Star Wars anime, the Blade Runner shorts, and the Animatrix all one episode,
Ooh, there you go.
and bring.
I would
Alright, well,
love to join.
Guys, thank you so much for having me. It's
No,
been
thank
an
you, man.
absolute
It's
pleasure.
good to have you back.
I am going to take this red pill and go down the rabbit hole and be super based.
I'm
Nice.
gonna take the red and the blue pill, crush it into a nice fine pink powder.
Oh, that might be a
there
bad
you go.
idea.
Yeah, sir, for
All
the
right.
last time, you are not based in red pilled. You are on the no-fly list. Please go
Yeah.
away.
I am blue pilled. I'm on the no-fly list, and I am a alternate version of Ben Shapiro and the creepy French guy. I get it.
Hypothetically
Okay.
speaking.
I
Hypothetically
have to
speaking,
say, I loved how that the Merovingian shows up as like a grungy homeless guy,
but not
in,
Hugo Weaving.
Resurrections. Yeah, because it's like
That's the
of
guy I
course-
wanted to come back.
Of course, his life is in shambles after losing Monica Bellucci.
And
That was probably the most accurate depiction in
that's the
the
most realistic scene in
entire
the movie.
resurrection. Yeah.
Mommy Bellucci.
But
Yeah,
anyways,
Mommy Bellucci.
that was a fun discussion. I know I was pretty negative, but it made for an interesting discussion. I hope you guys
Yes,
felt the same
and
way.
I won't be back next week, but
The
week
week
after
after.
next, I think we're talking about some drilling films. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll figure that out.
Oh boy.
Hopefully.
Oh
Alright.
boy.
Oh boy. Next week, thank you, Drew. I know you didn't get to say much. I'm sorry if I interrupted you a lot, buddy, but thank you so much for coming with us. I love having you on the show, man.
Nah, dude, it's fine. It's so much fun for me hearing your opinions in particular because they are so very contradictory to mine in so many ways. So, like, I just had a great time with this. Take care, Steven. It was so much fun hearing from you again, dude.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Good to talk again, Drew, and thank you all. Good night.
Yeah, good night.
Heck yeah.
And next Thursday, we are talking about the Godfather trilogy, which includes Godfather Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. I will not be seeing the coda of The Godfather 3, the remastered version. I'll just be seeing whichever version is on the Blu-ray, which is just the same version but with remastered footage with different looks, so it looks more clean, crisp. So look forward to that next week, and hopefully we can get a nice guest for that. Devin, maybe we should try and get I'm sorry, I forgot her name already. Is it Alexis?
Yeah.
I'm terrible with names. I do apologize, Alexis, if you're listening to this. Maybe you'd like to join us next week. We'll ask you and see what you think. And if so, yeah, I'd love to talk about these films with you guys. They're kind of a big part of my household too, and I haven't seen 3 yet, so I'm interested to see where that goes. Thank you again, Drew. Thanks, Devin, for the really fun discussion. And is the first day yet? Alright, take some red pills and get some panties wet, everybody. Goodbye.